2021. We're delighted to have all of our council members here and also staff who are supporting us and others who may be joining us. Remy, will you please call the roll for the meeting?
Of course. Angie Blackwell?
Here.
Katie Brooks is excused today. Peter Buckley?
Here.
Ann Kubish?
Here.
George Mendoza?
Here.
Dr. Peg Miller?
Here.
Kali Thorne Ladd? She's here.
Here.
Thank you. Sue Miller, Chair.
Here.
Today we have all of our agency leads are excused, who include Pat Allen, the Director of the Oregon Health Authority, Colt Gill, the Director of the Oregon Department of Education, Margaret Salazar, the Director of Oregon Housing and Community Services, and Liesl Wendt, the Deputy Director of Oregon Department of Human Services. And finally, we have Alyssa Chatterjee, the Acting Early Learning Systems Director for the Early Learning Division.
I'm here.
All right, great. Welcome, Alyssa, as this is your first formal council meeting, I think, as our acting director. So we're delighted to have you here. And council members, just so you know, Alyssa is going to be going kind of back and forth between our meeting and the Ways and Means Committee, which is sort of an important part of the legislative process. So we will understand as you bounce in and out, Alyssa.
Thank you.
So as the council knows, we begin our council meetings with appreciation of and sort of grounding in the Native American traditions that make our state what it is and provide the strength for us. And today I've asked our Tribal Affairs Manager, who's an Early Learning Division staff person, Valeria Antonasio, if she would please present the essential understanding, which this month, as you know, is language. So I'd like to formally welcome Valeria to our council meeting and thank her for being a part of the introduction today. I'll turn it over to you, Valeria.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you. Kahayam and Shluslaksan, Valeria Atanasio Neganim. Good afternoon. I am Valeria Atanasio, Tribal Affairs Manager with ELD, and I'm so excited to be sharing with you the essential understanding on language today. That's essential understanding number 7. This is really important to me and my family. So I'm excited to dive into this topic with you. And I have a little one here, just so you know, and you can probably hear her. So let's start off to talk a little bit about how language is defined, right? So language is defined by the method in which people communicate. Tribal languages have endured direct sort of attacks and through public policy and state policy attacks on language itself, but though some languages haven't survived, many have. And so that is through the direct work of tribes maintaining the connections through their ancestors, passing on language, and language being something more than just words, right? So language also carries worldviews, ways of being. And as you know, as a people, tribal people are very much oral history tellers and oral knowledge tellers. And so this is a very distinct part of our culture and something that is important and sacred to us as people. So each tribe obviously has their own distinct languages, which includes varied dialects. The language that I introduced myself in today was called Chinakwawa, and it's actually a trade language that's specific to the Pacific Northwest here in Oregon, and was developed after sort of the trade period, right, within our Oregon history. And it was a way for tribes to communicate with one another when they didn't necessarily speak the same language. So it's mixed of lots of different languages. You even will hear words in this language specifically that are, of French, origin, or other parts of the world. And so that's the language that I introduced myself in today. I'll give a little bit of a background about tribal languages specific to Oregon. And then if you have any questions, I'm happy to follow up with you in any way that I can. So obviously, as I stated, tribes in Oregon have the, big linguistic diversity. So in this landscape of ocean, shores, valleys, rivers, high deserts, plateaus, and mountains, distinct linguistic families existed in Oregon, which encompass many separate languages and dialects. It was common for members of tribes to be multilingual, as communication among groups was essential for the trade, political, and other reasons. And oftentimes, there would be inter-tribal marriages and inter-tribal groups that would come together to maintain those political and sort of trade partnerships with one another. So there was always, especially in our history, our women who married off into other tribes were often spoke, 3 to 5 languages. The Native Languages Act here in Oregon, in the United States in Oregon was in 1990, and it was enacted by Congress to declare that cultures and languages of Native American is unique, and the United States has the responsibility to act together with Native Americans to ensure the survival of these unique cultures and languages. So this is basically giving, the status that recognized distinct cultural and political rights to tribes, including the right to continue with separate identities as sovereign nations. So this is a direct policy that's, in contrast to past policies that actually preserves and protects and promotes the rights and freedoms of Native Americans to use, practice, and develop Native American languages. And I'm really excited to be part of an organization that is also writing distinct policies and creating distinct programs that also support this initiative. As you know, through the Early Childhood Equity Fund grant, language preservation is a direct use of that grant in itself that was called out, and many tribes are accessing funds right now to continue revitalizing their language and teach the next generations their histories through language development and literacy. Another thing about Oregon specifically that's included in the essential understandings is Senate Bill 690. So this is directed towards Teacher Standards and Practices Commission to establish an American Indian language teaching license. So each American Indian tribe can develop and may develop a written or oral test that applicants must successfully complete in order to determine their qualifications to teach the tribe's native language. This is really important. It allows the holders of these licenses to teach in schools really, the capacity to utilize their home language, their native language, one that they grew up knowing and hearing, and applying it directly to their profession, or being able to write tests into this academic area and become a teacher. So it's a really great step in the right direction, I think, and something that I really think supports revitalizing and preserving Native languages here in Oregon. So in Oregon specifically, as well, as you may know, if you've read this essential understanding, an estimated really 25 to 35 Native languages have been spoken in Oregon, but only 9 actually are spoken fluently today. So I know you guys have heard statistics in the past about dying languages and sort of like what that means for different communities. And I recently just heard in a training that I attended that about every 14 seconds, a language dies on Earth. And that is something that I think is a stark sort of reality in the world that we live in. And so I think about the ways that our programs and our services and our initiatives are sort of, trying to support preservation of language, support preservation of identity within tribes as being really essential for that to happen. And so I just want to leave you with that thought and say that this has been an eye-opening experience for me to come into my role too at the ELD and be able to actually put into motion some of the unique supports that not only one person can do, but we as a community for our children in Oregon, for our Indigenous, Native American, American Indian, Alaskan Native families really come together to support their identity, who they are, and value that historical and traditional oral knowledge. I think you're muted, Sue.
You're on mute. You're on mute, Sue.
Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Valeria. I was just saying we appreciate the background and obviously your lived experience and deep understanding of the importance of language. And Council, we will be seeing much more of Valeria in the months ahead for lots of reasons, but I'm assuming that the legislature is going to approve the bill that is going to establish a tribal hub. And Valeria will obviously play a very key role in helping develop that hub and helping us get that one implemented. So we will be seeing more of you, Valeria. And thank you. Thank you for today.
Masi, thank you.
Okay, so I understand there is no public testimony, correct? Okay, so we will move on. And I'm going to change the order of these updates a little bit and let Alyssa lead off before she has to jump into another meeting. So Alyssa.
Thank you, Sue, and apologies. I will be back this afternoon. Wanted to give 2 quick updates. So House Bill 3073, the governance bill that would create a Department of Early Learning and Care. As you all know, it's made its way out of the House Rules Committee and is on its way to Joint Ways and Means. We, as part of that process, have received some initial fiscal estimates on that. I know that's been a question for folks, sort of what's going to be the fiscal impact of this. So ELD and the Oregon Department of Education have been working together, and we have some ongoing conversations with the Legislative Fiscal Office to kind of understand what positions would be required in this new department, what capacity would be needed if ELD stayed within ODE, especially as we think about the increase in ARPA funds and just the amount of money we have to get out the door quickly. We're also looking at how we can leverage some of those ARPA funds to invest in capacity within the agency. So this is our opportunity to develop a more robust provider payment system that lives in the agency. It's an opportunity to create a provider search tool so that families are more easily able to find the childcare that meets their needs. So we're working with the governor's office to kind of outline some of those opportunities as well. And then there's a portion of the bill that also includes additional eligibility requirements for the employment-related daycare program. So ODHS is working on a fiscal impact and sort of what they can make estimates for right now, but they also have a report that would be due to the legislature in December to kind of give them more time to really get more robust estimates in terms of the number of additional children and families who would be eligible to receive services based on the recommendations of House Bill 3073. So just wanted you to know that this is in the works. Happy to make sure you all have a link to the fiscal impacts that are currently posted alongside House Bill 3073. And just wanted you to know that we're continuing to refine those estimates as we continue to move through the process and get ready for the Ways and Means conversation. Are there any questions about that before I move on to my second topic?
Alyssa, quick one. Do you have any idea when that might come before Ways and Means?
No, Ways and Means is still kind of making their way through agency presentations. We're also waiting for the May revenue forecast. I think the assumption is once we get that May revenue forecast, a lot of things are going to start moving. So I'm anticipating we won't see this come up until at least 2 weeks from now, maybe 3, but we'll probably have a clearer sense once we see the revenue forecast and Ways and Means starts preparing with that information.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Any other questions on 3073? Okay.
Okay, my second quick update was just COVID-19 health and safety licensing guidelines. So I know you've been hearing a lot from ELD and from Tammy and Jay, but on May 17th, so Monday, we will be releasing the next version of the health and safety guidelines. There's been a lot of engagement with providers. This has been a close partnership between the Early Learning Division and the Oregon Health Authority. So just wanted to make you aware that that is coming. It's been a lot of hard work. Want to also just appreciate the ELD and OHA staff who've continued to work through this and align this guidance as much as possible alongside our Ready School Safe Learners guidance for K-12 and our youth programs guidance for summer camp. So just wanted you to know that that's coming. I'm sure Remy will make sure you all get a link to that when it's posted, but that is continuing to move forward. We may also contact you as we think about what happens after these guidelines and after the state of emergency. There would be some rulemaking that's needed. So as we get additional guidance moving forward, we may be contacting you to bring you together sooner than your next meeting if needed. So just wanted you to have that in the back of your minds as well.
Okay, so the council may need to convene sometime in, who knows, June, maybe, to adopt rules, depending on what is happening with the emergency declaration and other moving targets.
Yes, I think it could be a broad range of when rules would need to be adopted. So we're continuing to work with the governor's office on that and just making sure that and ELD staff are prepping so that when we kind of get the indication of when we should be prepared to move away from guidelines, that we have everything ready to bring you all back together and adopt temporary rules where needed and kind of work through that transition. But as of right now, we're continuing forward with the MAID guidelines, and we'll continue to communicate with providers as we learn more as well.
Okay, and if we do need to have a meeting in June, I assume it would be a relatively short one because it'd be a very specific agenda, so maybe half an hour.
Yes, yeah. So we can make sure we're communicating if we need, whether that's June, this summer, in the fall, sharing additional information to prepare you for what adopting temporary rules would entail.
Okay, I just want council members to know it's not going to be another 4-hour slot that we're looking for. At least not, we don't think so. Okay, any questions of Alyssa before she signs off? All right.
All right.
Thanks, Alyssa.
Thanks. I'll be back.
Good luck with Ways and Means.
Thank you.
Let's move back up now to our the Children's Behavioral Health CCO metric. And council members, you'll remember that we had a wonderful presentation about this at our January meeting. And now we have been invited, as you know from the agenda, and requested actually to submit a letter of support for having a CCO metric that is focused on children's behavioral health. And Elena, who was part of our presentation and with the Children's Institute, is here to just give us a brief overview and reminder of what the metric is intended to do. And also, Elena, maybe you could give us a sense of the value of having an endorsement letter from the council. So thanks for being with us, Elena.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chair Miller. My name is Elena Rivera. I'm the Senior Health Policy and Program Advisor at Children's Institute, and I'm really here representing our broader team at Children's Institute, the Oregon Pediatric Improvement Partnership, and Oregon Health Authority. We've been working collaboratively for nearly 4 years now to identify, develop, and implement CCO incentive metrics that support early childhood health and kindergarten readiness. And we're here today because we're on the verge of a really pivotal milestone in our work after spending the last 2 years developing a new measure focused on young children's social emotional health from birth to age 5. And feel that the council's support of this measure would have a really meaningful impact. Across our work over the last 4 years, there has just been universal agreement from families and stakeholders that we have to invest attention and resources into improving social emotional health services. And that includes both ensuring we have sufficient capacity in a full spectrum of services that support children's social emotional health, and that those services are designed to be culturally and linguistically responsive, and also addressing the barriers to access that children and families face, whether it's because of geographic location or provider bias or other barriers that we're really seeing in our state. We believe this work was necessary long before the pandemic, but it's been made even more urgent now in light of the impacts that COVID-19 has had on family, economic hardship, stress, trauma, child development. And so as we move forward to present this metric for adoption to the Metrics and Scoring Committee later this month, we really want to ensure that that committee hears both the importance and the urgency of this focus on social emotional health from the perspective of those who deeply understand the needs of children and families in our state. And that's you all as the Early Learning Council. We also know this is work that won't be accomplished by CCOs alone. It will require really extensive partnership and collaboration across sectors and providers and services and communities. And so early learning representatives have been incredible partners throughout the development of the measure, including hub representatives, ELD staff, and community-based partners who are providing early learning programming. And have helped us to really ensure that the metric is aligned with Raise Up Oregon priorities. And so we are, believing that the time is now for this measure. Oregon really can't afford to delay this work any longer, and think that the council voicing your support would have a real enormous impact on helping to move the metric and this focus forward. So thank you so much for considering this request. There were additional background materials that we shared in January and that were in your meeting packet, but I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Elena. Yes, questions, Peter?
Elena, can you just remind me of the timeline? If the approval happens later this month, when does the metric go into effect? When do the CCOs begin to use it?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So the Metrics and Scoring Committee is making decisions this summer for their 2022 incentive measure set. So the measure would go into effect starting January 1st of next year.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Great question, Peter. Other questions from council members? What I would like, thank you, Elena, for being with us and for the background and all of the work that you and the rest of your team have done to get us this far. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think this is true for many aspects of early childhood programs these days, that the time is right. So moving forward. So council members, what I would appreciate is having a motion that will direct staff to develop a letter of support for this CCO metric that we can then submit to the committee?
This is Angie. I would like to make the motion that the staff develop a letter in support of the motion of the proposed metric.
Great.
And this is Anne, and I would enthusiastically like to second that motion because this is something that our foundation has been working on in partnership with CI, the Children's Institute, and OPIP for a long time. And I had the pleasure or honor of reading a very long PowerPoint that was presented that had the latest information in it. And it is so important, and and as you say, it's such a good moment. And I will give you just one statistic that I took away from this PowerPoint presentation, which is what percent of children with a risk social factor having any social emotional services in Oregon. And I looked at the foster care, the kids who are in foster care. 16% of kids in foster care have any social emotional services or assessment or services. I thought if the kids in foster, only 16% of the kids in foster care, we cannot overstate the need for this. So I'm an enthusiastic second on this.
Thank you, Anne, and thanks for sharing that startling and disturbing statistic. Wow. Any other discussion of this motion and the enthusiastic second of it? If not, Council.
I just concur with.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Colleen.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I concur with Anne and Elena and just how important this is. So I'm excited about it.
Great. Yeah, I think there's a side of us, Elena, that appreciates having the opportunity to explain and establish our support for it. So council members, those in favor of this motion, please say aye or raise your hand, whatever is most efficient in this virtual world.
Aye.
Right. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. And staff, we look forward to having a letter that we can send on.
Thank you all so much. It's really, really incredible to hear your support and think will be really meaningful for the metrics and scoring committee.
Thank you. You know, I know you may well have other things to do this afternoon, Elena, but later in our agenda, we're going to be talking about the CCDF, the Child Care and Development Fund. And many parts of that have to do with behavioral health and mental health for kids and families. So this is a theme that is certainly ongoing for the council in many different arenas. So thanks again. Now we will go to Jay, and I greatly appreciate you being on this call with us. Jay, I don't know if council members have met Jay Messenger before. I worked with Jay, it must be 2 years ago now, Jay, on the safety portal.
Yes, fall 2019.
Yeah, wow. We were rolling forward and then COVID stopped everybody in our tracks. Anyway, Jay is, as you know from the agenda, co-director of our Office of Child Care and really focused on licensing. And as you know, Council, we've asked staff to, because rulemaking is one of our primary responsibilities for child care, we've asked staff to always give us a heads up of rules that are coming down the path that we're going to have to adopt or revise and adopt in the future. And so Jay is presenting that today, just briefly, so we have a heads up for what's coming this summer. So Jay, I'll let you give us the overview.
Okay. Thank you, Chair Miller, and thank you, members of the council. This is a notice of future rulemaking relating to a rule in our CBR set of rules. It relates to adult protective services history. The background for this is during a Secretary of State audit that finished up with its report in July 2020, and that audit looked at background checks for child care in both DHS and our agency. It was recommended that OCC expand its review of adult protective services history for folks that are applying to be in our central background registry. To do that, we need a rule change of literally a word. We're going to take one word and replace it with the other, and then another, or at least that's our proposal. The reason for this change is this. Our current rule only allows us to review adult protective services history if the applicant, and we have a question on the application, if the applicant discloses that they have adult protective services history. If they disclose it, then we can go to DHS, seek information about it, and review the protective services history and its impact on the CBR. If they don't disclose it, though, we don't have the rule authority, although we have statutory authority, we don't have the rule authority to look at that. So what the proposal is, the current phrase in our rule 414-6150 sub 6 says, if a subject individual discloses adult protective services history, OCC will seek to obtain and review information related to that history. And the change would be removing disclose and replacing it with has. So if a subject individual has adult protective services history, OCC will seek to obtain and review information related to the history and then use that in our CBR application determination. That's the proposed change and the reasons for the change. We would bring that change back to the council at the August 11th meeting for a vote after we go through the public rulemaking process.
All right. Thank you, Jay. Any quick questions, Jay? Obviously, this is sort of audit driven, but sounds like an important change for us to make. Okay, thanks, Jay. We will see you in July, I'll bet, or August.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair Miller, members of the council. Have a good day.
Thank you. So I want to just, while we're sort of on early learning division updates, I wanted to share one with the council from Katie. As you know, Katie can't be with us today. She had another obligation. But she sent me an email yesterday saying that she regretted not being here, but also wanted to share some really good news with us. And I'm sure you all have read about the fact that with the federal rescue plan money, ARPA funds, the legislative leadership decided to give each representative $1 million to spend in his or her own district. Is it 2 million, Peter? Wow, $2 million in each district on anything they chose to spend it on. And Katie sent me an email saying that Senator Tim Knopp, obviously from the Central Oregon area, allocated $1 million to a childcare program that they've been trying to launch for 3 years in the Central Oregon area, with Bend as the center point, that would enable the community college there, as well as OSU, their branch in Bend, to establish a childcare center.
Nice.
And yeah. So they've got $1 million. They need another $1 million, and they're hoping that they'll get that from the county. And the $1 million, the model that they're establishing and have been working on, as I say, for 3 years, they'll provide about 100 infant to pre-K childcare slots.
Wow.
They're going to use prefab childcare modules that can be located on vacant lots on the community college or university property. They're going to use community college early learning related students to help staff this childcare center. The priority for having children enrolled in this center will be students and faculty of the colleges. And then other openings will be provided to other families as available and as possible.
Nice.
So yeah, Peter.
So it's actually every representative received $2 million and every senator received $4 million to distribute. So, and a lot of them, at least some of the Southern Oregon delegation, are focusing on early childhood as well. So it's some positive things are happening.
Wow. Peter, do you know what they're looking at in Southern Oregon?
In Rogue River, there's been a proposal to do like a community wellness center. There's not much access to healthcare or to childcare in Rogue River. So the center is both a clinic and it's also a childcare center for infant and toddlers. So that looks like that's going to be funded. And the Family Nurturing Center has a project in Medford that is a multi-generational housing project that would include a preschool as part of the overall project. And it would also include 6 apartments for youth that are aging out of foster care as well. So it's the idea to get multi-generational, but definitely get a child care center there or a preschool there as well.
Yeah. How exciting. Any other reports from around the state? Have you heard of how your representatives and senators are going to spend their millions of dollars?
I didn't even know it existed, but now that I know it existed, I'm going to find out.
Make a few phone calls. Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a great strategy for all of us, since we know this is very flexible funding.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's. I think to believe the deadline was last Monday, for them to announce their projects. And different legislators were more transparent than other legislators. Apparently, this is all part of a deal to not have walkouts during the session. So the idea was that if we could have every senator and every representative have some money to spend on their district in exchange for a guarantee not to walk out of the legislature, or so the legislature can complete its business. That's part of part of this dynamic that's going forward. So
well, every parent knows sometimes you have to stoop to bribery.
Yeah.
That is a parent strategy, isn't it, Anne? And grandparent.
So, for instance, in Southern Oregon, Senator Jeff Golden, he basically announced through Southern Oregon Success and other community groups that these dollars were available, and gave a 3-day window for people to let him know which projects were being developed in early childhood, education as a whole, or homelessness. Those are his priorities. But other state senators, the one from the Grants Pass area, won't even return phone calls or talk to anybody. So we don't know what that person's doing. So each legislator has handled it in a different way.
Wow. Yeah, what an extraordinary time for all of us, but especially to be in the legislature. I bet you never had discretionary money like that, did you, Peter?
No, I spent my time there cutting budgets, Sue. That was my job.
I remember those years. Less fun. Fun.
George, I don't have any documents. I mean, I could send you Senator Golden's statement on it and his form, but that was the only thing I got was an email.
I was just thinking, though, it's an interesting topic, and it's not been shared probably, and maybe it has been shared very publicly, but just to learn of it this way, and whatever we could have done to advocate, or whatever we could have done to better understand what the strategy was, that would have been good for us to have known. So it's just I'm happy. I guess I'd say that too. I'm happy that people can do that. Just seems odd, but yeah.
It's a very strange. I don't think it'll be repeated. I doubt it'll be repeated, but.
And George, you're raising a really good point. I think I only know about that from, I don't know, reading it in some newspaper somewhere. But I think when information like that does become available, it'd be really great to have staff shoot that kind of information out to council members, because staff will probably hear about it before we do, since you have tentacles in the legislature. And then that would enable council members to touch base with their representatives and senators and ask for support for whatever projects. So it's a good point, George. We'll try to include that in some of our future discussions and planning.
I'll put a link in the chat to an article that was on OPB about it.
Perfect. Yeah, that's probably where I heard about it. Thanks, Peter. Good heads up. Good heads up. All right, well, good news in lots of different arenas. Hi, Carrie, welcome. I appreciate you joining us. I understand you've already had a busy full day.
Right.
We appreciate being a part of it. Council, we're going to move on now to our discussion about the listening sessions. That's our, at least, tentative name. It started as town halls, and then we talked about the phrase that BUILD uses, which is beneficiary visit. Now, right now we're at listening sessions. But as you know, we've been talking about this for several months now, and looking at it as a way to listen to people in communities around the state, try to understand what's working for them as they try to raise young children, what's not working, what services are really most important to them, which ones would they like to have, but they're missing, but they understand others have them and they're really valuable. And giving us an opportunity, I think, to learn personally, and also to try, obviously, to try to identify where are institutional barriers that we potentially could helping impact that would enable parents to have more support for raising young children. And then we also have talked about tying this into the equity lens that we try to apply to all of the work we do. And that's sort of, I guess, the foundation of what has brought us to this point today, working with Carrie, who does a lot of this work at BUILD, and fortunately is one of our BUILD consultants. And then when Sherry's able to join us, Carrie and Sherry will be presenting more information, as they did at our last meeting 2 weeks ago. So just to sort of set the goalpost of where I hope we're going with this conversation today, is that we can formally endorse the idea that, yes, we want to hold these listening sessions, and if we can adopt a protocol, or at least start to adopt pieces of a protocol of how we would like to approach these listening sessions, and obviously identify any questions, any additional information that we need as we work with Carrie, Sherry, and our staff to move forward with this process. We've talked about having the target be October and incorporate this as part of our annual retreat. So that's not firm, obviously, but sort of a target, thinking maybe we'll go through enough of COVID by then to have come up for air, and everyone else have come up for air as well. So with that as sort of the background and foundation, Carrie and Sherry, welcome again. Thanks for being back with us. I'll turn it over to the two of you.
That's great. It's great to be with all of you here again. Today's focus is, you'll see that we repeated, but we updated the data slides based on feedback and the conversations you had with Sue in preparation for today's meeting. We want to talk to you more about the process for the actual visits and explore that further with you, so we can start to get more concrete. And through these conversations, we want to hear if there's any challenges that you want to anticipate and help us think about. And Sherry particularly has been doing a lot of these in the past year, and has a lot of experience during COVID of what it looks like and how to overcome some of the challenges. And then how do we get to next steps? We're building on the conversation we had with you last time, where we kind of posited to you BUILD's understanding on the why, we do this work from an equity point of view? How do we understand from families what they're experiencing and tie it to the root causes and the institutional and structural racism that exists, and that's what we're trying to change, and how that action that we need to take really is the intersection of leaders taking action to change programs and structures. And it's really the joint cross-sector work that you have all identified and Raise Up Oregon of where this work can take place, that it's no one leader by themselves, even as each leader can take action on their own. So we're excited to talk about this work with you. Sherry, did you want to do the next couple slides, or me?
I'm happy to do it. And so thank you again for having us back. And I just want to ground you in the answer to the test, that all that we're talking about is designed to increase opportunities for children and families who've been marginalized or eligible for, but not benefiting from the programs and services offered by states and communities. And to do that, we want to increase opportunities. We want to remove barriers to those opportunities, in part by listening and talking to them. We want to distribute resources for programs and human capital in ways that don't further exacerbate inequity. Sometimes it's about location, sometimes it's about the amount of time we spend listening, sometimes it's about actually investing more so that people can have the same benefit because of the structure of their community, the structure of the neighborhood. And then finally, we want to make sure that we are working to measure the changes we make to make sure that we're reaching the population we say we want to meet. Carrie.
Yeah.
And so as Carrie pointed out, we went over this with you, and it's important to keep refreshing. It's the feedback loop that we like having with you, is that this work is focused on leaders and leaders' ability to use their roles, responsibility, and influence. That data is critical for planning, decision-making, and monitoring, both qualitative and quantitative data. That root causes really drive where we should place solutions, that we shouldn't be looking for easy, quick fixes or often low-hanging fruit as a long-term solution. We should be going after root causes. That change happens at multiple levels, but in this work with you, we are attempting to focus on interpersonal, getting to know people who may be out of our social network and certainly marginalized by our early childhood system, to make institutional change within specific organizations, institutions, departments, and divisions, but also structurally between those organizations. So we build childcare, but we don't care about transportation, or we build childcare and we don't care about the families linked to healthcare or healthy opportunities. Those things need to go together. And that none of this works with any of us being a hero, that it requires that we work with people, programs, and structures.
For the data conversation and the kind of next level of conversation we want to have for you today, this, is to reintroduce what we talked to you about last time, that we really care about quantitative and qualitative together, we really need both, right? Because we often have to live with the data that we have, not the data we want. We really want to try to use this combination of different sources of data to think about really identifying who's benefiting, because we want to keep services and structures and policies that are working for people that's benefiting. And so this is really about who's not benefiting that should be, and how do we make tailored changes so that they can benefit as well. We want to do the identification of root causes and really tie the personal and interpersonal experiences to the kind of structural and institutional root causes that are creating those situations and creating the marginalization. This will help us uncover strategies and actions that can be taken. And then we're going to do that feedback loop from communities, because nothing's ever perfect. So how do we learn from the impact of those strategies and continue to prove our work with communities over time? So what we did was we re-looked at our slides, right? And there's no one single data source that kind of helps us think about how do we take all the data that we know and put that together. So one place we always start with is, where is our young child population and the children that are birth to 5? And so here, the darker the blue color, the higher the population you can see in the legend. And we sent the specific data slides to you ahead of time. So if you want to flip back and forth between the data slides, and not just what we happen to give you up here one at a time. You can do that. We also gave you kind of what we know by race, and this is for children under the age of 18. It's not tailored specifically to children birth to 5. So you can see kind of how the population shifts when you start to look at race and how that is distributed across the state in different ways. But then we immediately go to the next question of like, how do we think about this, this information disaggregated but interacting? So the bar graph is what's showing you about the intersection of poverty with race. So you can see the orange bar is Oregon's average. So that gives you an average of the percentage of families or children birth to 5 that are living at or below the federal poverty level. But when you disaggregate by race, you can see who's more impacted and not being supported by our systems and programs and services, and where the intensity of the poverty for each population lives. And so that's the kind of thinking that we're trying to bring to this work. So you might remember that the last time we came to talk to you, we started to explore with you about, all right, if we can't do kind of listening or beneficiary voice visits all across the state all at once, how do we pick and start somewhere with the eventual goal that you would make it around the state? So we look for quantitative data to get us started and try to take some of these indexes that take multiple situations, challenges, characteristics, demographics, and put them together to see if that helps you start to see where your populations are either the most isolated, the least access to resources, the most marginalized, and is that the place that you want to start? Now, quantitative data is often, this is often national data, census data, so it's not perfect. So part of the conversation we want to have with you is we've identified a potential 6 places where we could start, but we want to get your reaction because you know the context within the state of, is this well represented? Are there some shifts and changing happen versus these static numbers that we're putting in front of you of what else and who else should be considered in a first round? So we look at the county health rankings, and in this case, the darker the color, the higher of the poor health outcomes for those parts in the state. So that's one way to kind of look at the state. And this gives you the counties the 11 counties that rank the lowest in health outcomes and health factors. We then looked at the social deprivation index, and this is really looking at the socioeconomic variation and how it's connected to your health outcomes. So that's where the slide gives you details for the kinds of things each of these indexes are encouraged in looking at. And when you see this list of counties that have the worst scores, what is in orange is the counties that also showed up in the top 10 of the poor health outcomes rankings. So it shows you that depending on what set of factors you look at, then what set of counties kind of raise to the top of concern kind of shifts. So that continues to be like, well, then how do we continue to think about where to go and why? So what we wanted to propose to you as a first blush, but then hear back from you, is the counties in purple. When you crosswalk county health factor rankings, the social deprivation index, the counties in purple kind of raise to the top. And so what we did—
Hey, Carrie, Kaylee has a question.
Oh, okay. I think I have too many windows.
Just if you can go back to the previous slide. Or sorry, the one before that, with the health.
You want the county health one?
Yeah. Well, okay, you showed this as being the rankings, and I'm wondering how much the number, because it's a percentage, how much does the number of people, my guess is that for some of the smaller areas, the percentage of impact great, but the number of people is less than what you'd find in more heavily populated areas. So it becomes a hard thing. I mean, I want to know number of people impacted, not just percentages. And I'm wondering if it's only collected in percentages. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we can go back and look at the methodology. Actually, most of these try to take that into account, but you also don't want to exclude rural areas for having a low number of kids if a low number of kids are having a poor experience. So that argument plays both ways. But if you looked at population numbers, and I think later we do start to show you some population numbers so you could get a sense of that. But I think these are weighted based on that factor, but we will verify that.
Agreed. And then I guess my other question, and I don't want to leave out rural areas at all. I think when I looked at, I'm assuming it's based on best practice. I don't know which slide it was now, but you laid out what the different determinants are, like parent under 25 years of age, or I don't know, there were different things.
Yeah.
Where did those from? Is that just best practice in terms of being predictive of children being at risk in early childhood? Is that where those indicators come from? That one, yes, the social deprivation index, yeah. So my question is, those bullet points, who created them, and are they sort of proven, I guess the Robert Graham Center, but are they proven to be predictive? Because in my experience, sometimes we have indicators that aren't actually predictive of children being successful, families being successful. So I'm wondering, has that been tested?
And then if I could just add on to that, I've just been interacting with one of my great coaches on my staff who says that the OHA OPIP health complexity data could also be really helpful and could influence this conversation too. So that there are other sources of data. Just want to put that in there.
Yeah, I think the questions you're raising are really important ones. That's why we share with you here, like the county health rankings. They considered a lot of things in the health rankings, not just clinical care or healthy behaviors, right? But they associate some of the social and economic as well as the physical environment, where the social deprivation one, right, doesn't really think about air quality and water quality, but it does also consider housing. So I think part of why Sherry and I share this with you is no index is perfect, and we can double check with you about how they make the case or argument of why they picked what they picked. You know, this is really just a starting point. So I think what Sherry and I want to hear from you as you see the 6, it's not that Sherry and I have a stake on the 6 counties. I think what we want to hear back from you is you understand rural and urban and suburban communities in Oregon, as you know of state or like the OPIP data sources. Are there other criteria you want to use before we settle on a final list? Or do you like this list, but you would want to add 1 or 2 places because of X, Y, and Z? So I think that it's really a starting place rather than this is the ending.
And I don't think any of these indicators, the only one that I know is linked directly to child outcomes is the Race Matters indicators, and it doesn't do it at the county level, it does it at the state level. But if you look at Race Matters, income, education, employment, these stability factors are linked to child well-being, not as an individual indicator, but as a grouping. But I don't think there is an indicator that, a set of indicators that's directly related to child well-being other than the Race Matters, which isn't counting.
Right. So what we did by giving you these maps was to show you, because each county is also probably from a land mass perspective large enough, then how would we, when you're comfortable with the final list of where to go, then within each of those, where would you really go? So we wanted to give you these examples of how we could start to help analyze or use maps for the conversation in comparison, in addition to what you already know about where you should go and where you want to listen to. So we tried to take a map. So every map starts with the poverty rate by census tract. So each color you can see, the darker the orange color, the higher the rate of the poverty. And then we tried to take the specific birth to 5 population numbers, but you can see it's from 2018 that we know for that area. So you would be able to kind of like Holly's question of how many kids are we talking about and who are they, so that as we think about a continuum that we might want to include in this list, are we clear with ourselves of have we picked really small communities, medium-sized, large-sized communities to hear from? And then the data for racial makeup, this is to help also think about, are there some targeted marginalized communities within these counties you want to hear from? And is it interesting to you to see either, is this information you kind of already knew about these counties, or these are kind of static numbers from Sherry and my perspective, but it's you guys who might know that there's been some recent great shifts, there's been some context, there's some growth in certain populations. So for example, for Jackson County, it shows that the Hispanic population is at 23% as the second largest population. So it was to see if that kind of information is also helpful to you. And the terminology of here comes from the census data, not from Sherry and I picking on how to describe the race. So it kind of goes with the census tract information. So we did that for each of the 6 counties as a place to start this conversation with you. So we could look at all 6, or we could hop to the kind of discussion question we have for you today, which is, do these 6 counties feel like a good place to make, or what criteria is missing that we would add to the analysis that might add some other communities as a place to start, and take others off as a place, right? Really just talking about priorities and how to pick where to start, and enough diversity that you feel like you're hearing from a cadre of families from various points of places in your state.
And George has raised, has data ever been collected statewide on ACEs data for social determinants? I don't know of an index. There's some retrospective indexes that's done, and I can't remember the name right now, that people use, DCs used it. Can you remember the name of it, Carrie? But not as a matter of national policy. It would be done state by state.
So isn't the OPIP data though comes close to that? Because the OPIP data talks about access to healthcare in terms of social determinants of health, housing, access to food, and also I think blends in things like child neglect and abuse, foster care participation, etc.
Yeah. Closer. Those are the things that I see missing in this other data. That's what made me raise the question. It doesn't talk about substance abuse or foster care. Like those are all factors we know impact early childhood. So I was struck that it didn't include some of those. And the ACEs, I think OPIP does have ACEs related data in their pool.
So if we could get a hold of that data, we would layer that on top of this. I will say from my experience, when you go to the community, layering things on like percent of kids going into foster care and things like that, those are systemic decisions as much as they are facts and related to the infrastructure. And so, it would matter who you were talking to the data about. This is just saying, here's a place to go and listen. And we could layer on and see if that shifts anything.
Right. Yeah, I think that would be helpful. And certainly I think the OPIP, that health complexity data, I know they've obviously spent a lot of time developing that. So it looks as if there is additional information. I think going back to Kali's earlier question about numbers of kids, as I looked at the 6 maps, county maps, and then the drilling down. So the last ones that you were beginning to show, right. Carrie.
Right.
I don't know if there's a way to make sure we don't end up only in rural, small, hard to access communities with probably, at the community level, not the county level, but, and then, yeah, you throw up Multnomah County and I would have no idea where to start. Kali may have an idea where to start, but How do we make sure we've got that balance? Rural, urban, lots of kids, not many kids, et cetera.
I mean, one of the things we could do, if part of it is population, is that we could look at this list, right? So all of these counties showed up one way or another on the County Health and Social Deprivation Index, and we could combine the OPIP data and then look at population. So if you guys are like, okay, there's definitely the small rural experience that we want to make sure we understand, and then there's these kinds of sizes of populations of children. I don't know how to categorize them right now, other than like medium, large, and like your biggest urban center. You guys might come back to us and say, 3 of these counties really represent really rural and very different really rural experiences. So instead, we'll take 1 or 2 off and we'll add Lane County or Marion County on because that's Lane in it, and we want to think about that. Or there's something particular about what's happening in southeastern Oregon, and there's some characteristics going on there. We want to add them to the list. So this is where it's just you guys are adding context and information, or how we go back and layer some things on it so you can look at the list and make a final decision.
Carrie, one other thing I was just thinking about looking is that the other way, another additional thing for council to think about is maybe starting with 1 or 2, do you see, to get going? And so maybe it's trying to build what are the first factors for where you go, because obviously there's been a lot of conversation here around ensuring that there's good representation from around the state. But that's another piece that I thought maybe I was starting to think about in a practical matter too, is that, you know, maybe it'd be sort of, I don't want to say the word piloting, but listening first in 1 or 2 communities, learning from that experience, and then going and making decisions about where else at that point after people have had the first experiences.
Okay, Carrie, let me do the next section so we don't run out of time. Is that okay, Sue?
Yeah, sure, Sherry.
Okay, and then we can
come back.
So one of the things that, and now we're going to talk about the process of the listening. And so it follows on Harry's point about getting started, because getting started is important. And there are lots of people to listen to. Did a couple consultations with states today. We start with children and families, or families with young children, but then often we have to also listen to the workforce and providers to get the full spectrum of the story. I wouldn't put them in the same room, but I'm respecting that sometimes you have to have multiple conversations to see the whole elephant. Next slide. And so why do we want to listen? We want to listen because often we're far from those we intend to benefit, and that understanding the lived experience is so critical to designing services and programs. And it's really just a part of continuous improvement. It's not that we've done it right or we've done it wrong. It's that with understanding lived experience, we can get it better. And the farther you move from service delivery, you hear less voices than you might hear when you're on the front line actually providing services. And addressing equity requires that we think about many and varied opportunities. So not just early learning, but of course, what's going on in housing and transportation and the quality of the community. And as leaders, we get up every morning with a passion and drive from our own stories, but there are multiple views of the stories we want to have. And families and communities are not situated the same all the time. And so as you think about your 6 places, if it's 6 or if it's 10, you do want some diversity in those areas. But if you plan and design around those communities, it will have a ripple effect. If we haven't shared the article Curb Cut with you, we should, because it gives you an example of how a policy then ripples out. And most of our social networks themselves are not very diverse to give us the kind of broad spectrum we need. And so this article, Changing the Discourse in Schools, just points out that the goal of these beneficiary voices visits are to shift from single stories to multiple stories. That's hard actually for leaders to hold in place, but it's important for us to do in the work, to not just fix what we can touch and feel and see, but to think about root causes, to look for inquiry and adaptive challenges versus just technical fixes on what we're doing already, and to know that we have a role in it, that it's not about telling other people what to do, but we have a role in moving things forward. And even with imperfect information and imperfect solutions, we want to get started. So when we're doing the beneficiary voices, there's 4 big goals, and I think I shared those with you before. One is to understand and learn from families what their goals are. They're actually not waiting for us to show up on a horse and bring them services. They get up every day and take care of their children, take care of their families, and they've got big ideas about what they want for them. So one of the hardest parts about this work is just listening in the visits. You get the opportunity to go back and we'll talk about the feedback loop, but the beginning is just listening. We then want to develop populations with people who are experiencing disparities. We want to hear from people who institutions and structures have failed, to understand what the root causes are, to be able to intervene. We want to see individuals from a position of strength. They've managed, they make their life work. We talk to folks where grocery stores are not available and they tell you how to get food. So people have a story about how they've been determined and how they've sought for inclusion to meet the needs of their children and families. And then, of course, we want to be doing this because we are going to apply what we learned, not maybe immediately, but over time, to the design, development, implementation, and monitoring of the services that we're offering. And we want to tailor those services. So this is not always about new money. While new money is available right now, it's about taking the universal services that should be available and figuring out how it should be targeted or monitored to meet the needs of children and families. We want to intentionally seek the input from beneficiaries in an ongoing matter. It's really a cycle of improvement over time. As Harriet mentioned, you might go out and begin a conversation with one community and then layer in another community, but then go back to that community. That this is an ongoing process. It's not a one and done. And we want to share challenges inside of this leadership team and with others so that when we go back to community, we can be clear about what are the timelines. Government doesn't move so fast, money doesn't shift so fast, but we want to be transparent about what the challenges are as we think about what families are telling us that is most important to them and what should be done. So just a conversation for a minute, and I know we're at the 5:15. What challenges do you see in front of you? You can give us some, questions. We're going to be here over time, so we don't have to answer them all tonight. But if there are challenges that you foresee, either in a virtual world where we've still been doing it or in a face-to-face world, I'm happy to answer a few questions.
Well, I can see a opportunity just because the work we're doing. For instance, we recently launched a family advisory council, which has 21 members from all walks of life, including undocumented folks. It would be great to have a chance to have the council listen to this group of people that we've assembled in Southern Oregon. So it's an opportunity if we want to pursue it.
Great, thank you, Peter. And that would be a great place to begin to think about what's your protocol. And then you might discover that those individuals are connected to other individuals, and depending on where they live, they could connect you to set up the next focus group. I don't, and I've had this conversation, I think, with Sue, I don't encourage us creating advisory groups and that's all we listen to. We need to staff them so that they can bring you access to other families that really represent their community. So they don't have the burden of being the only one telling the story. But that's a great opportunity, Peter, to begin thinking about even what the questions should be and how we might organize for inclusion.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, Peter, and what maybe other council members can offer is what do you know that's going on around the state as we try to, select where do we want to focus?
Yeah, this is Anne, if I could jump in.
Yeah.
I actually have a question, which is, I just want to be reminded of how many people and how many visits are we talking about? Are we talking about 5 people in each of 6 communities having 1 visit? So we're talking about 30 people's conversations with 30 people one time? Or are we talking about something over time that will inform us? Because this is, I really appreciate all the thought that's gone into this, but and what I would say is, with all of this good thinking, if we're using it for sort of one-time feedback from 30 people, maybe this could actually be informing us as over the longer haul about sort of a longer term relationship. But I also wanted to say that one of the things that we were thinking about when we saw this was how underutilized the parenting education hubs are, because those reach out to parents all the time in a very organic and natural way. And that could be a great source of sort of conversation in an ongoing way, in sort of in some of the same ways that Peter was talking about, as he has a group that's already meeting on some of these fronts. So that was a question and a suggestion.
Yeah, and both of those are great. On the first part, I'll give you an example from another state where they actually are doing 30 in 11 counties, and they plan to go back because it's an ongoing feedback loop. But the way they did it was they sent out an application for local partners, and the local partners, which we recommend anyway, organized the group of families on the ground that they were going to listen to. This is being done virtually because it's being done now. And we do say in a Zoom type environment, no more than 5 to 8 families. But the idea is that you go back to the partner, in 2 to 3 months and say what you heard and how you're processing it and what you're doing with it. So your second point, that parent hub might be a way to have that ongoing feedback loop if you use that infrastructure as a way to do it. I would just encourage you to support them, and sometimes that's with stipends or just with a request, to not only connect with the families that are connected to them, because those families usually have some social support, but to find ways to go beyond those families over time in the listening. Maybe the first round is families are connected to, but when you get to the second round, you also want to get to families who are not being connected to service as well.
I want to just add on to, I agree with what you just said, Sherry, and I think in particular the stipends are important. I think we're gaining their lived experience as expertise that can inform our work and strategies to be compensated for that and say. But I think Anne's comment made me think about what are the systems currently in place. Like there should be a systemic approach where we're looking at what already exists. I do understand what Sherry's saying in that if people are connected, they probably have more support. And yet, when I think about some of the community organizations in the metro region that are serving refugee families or, immigrant families that have a lot of barriers success, I think there is another layer beyond, but I wouldn't want to underestimate how important it is to capture their voices. Because they have relationship with these other entities, it would be easier to do so. And one of the things that we have found in the community we serve, when we are able to host a listening session like at Kairos, the families feel comfortable participating. If a third party says, I want to do a listening session, who from your community wants to participate? The participation much less because they're not in a safe space with trusted people that they know, I don't know, that their voice matter. And so having that third party broker, I think, is extremely important to getting information and get participation in the way that we want. And can Callie, you guys hear me?
Yeah, Callie, it's also important because I find, and I'm doing some groups now on infant mortality, that families will share something that needs follow-up, and by having that local partner host it, they can do the follow-up. Remember that we're going to just listen And also it's a way
Yeah.
that when you send the feedback, the host organization can say, look, I heard from them, here's what they're doing so far, because it may take you longer to get back than you want. But the important point of families will share things, and it's not the opportunity to try to fix anything in these groups, but to listen, but that local partner can follow up to support families.
Yeah. The last thing I wanted to say is I guess this is for you, Sue, if the council had not seen Chimamanda Adichie did a TED talk about the danger of the single story. Yeah. It's really good. Sherry opened up by talking about how we have to be careful of single stories, and it's just a really good TED talk that I think emphasized that would be great for the council to watch. I think it's 15 minutes. So I just want to put that out there.
Absolutely, Callie, that's a great resource.
Remy, will you get that to us? Just send us an email after the meeting so we have that link. Thanks, Kali. I appreciate any suggestions like that of things we can listen to.
Could I just say one more thing?
Yeah.
We in our foundation, we do listening groups and working teams to guide absolutely everything we do all of the time. And so, we do this with all of our community work all the time. One of the things that I think, and I'm sure it's implied in everything that you all are saying, is a lot of times there's a concern that this information becomes extractive, and that people give information, but they don't see how it's being used or what they get back from it, or and so on. And so the more it becomes a conversation, a respectful conversation that says, we appreciate your information, and this is how we're using it, and these are the questions we have for you, and then go back and say, this is how we used it, and this is the influence that it's had on us, and so on. I think it's really, it's not just a one-time thing, and I'm sure that's implied in everything that you're doing here, but I just want to say that out loud for the purposes of this discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why we continue to say, got to have a feedback loop, got to have a partner that allows you to go back and, be honest with people about timelines. I put the link to the Curb Cut article in the chat, and so Remy can get that out to folks as well. The last couple slides are more, micro. It's about the process, and we should co-create the process together. Some of the things you've mentioned already are here, so I won't take time going through that, but stipends are here. If it's virtual, it's no more than 45 to 60 minutes. You're gonna have another question, have another conversation. We are more curious than the information we can do something with immediately. So we should only have about 5 to 8 questions. We encourage you to go in a team. It's not helpful for one person to hear it, but other people hear the story in different ways. And my most important piece of advice is quotes, not notes, because as you come back to your larger team, you want to be able to say, here's a theme I heard, but here are the quotes that got me to that theme, so that you can have constructive conversation about, is that the theme, or did they mean something else going through? The next slide just talks about after the visit, that the visit or the conversation is the beginning of a process, certainly not the end or the middle, that you want to come back and think about your reactions, think about strategies, think about partners who you may need to communicate with, because only a portion of what you hear is going to be within your lane. Other pieces are going to be in other folks' lane. And then, as we said over and over, return to the community or local partner to share what you learned. And finally, and I'm not going to do it today, there's a set of slides in your deck that talk about what to do after the visit, really the process of processing the visit. And we'll go over that at another point, that you're really looking for institutional and structural things, that there are changes that happen at multiple levels, but we will reserve that for another conversation.
Okay, so I know Sherry has to sign off in about 3 minutes, but I think Carrie can stay on a little longer.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to understand, what do you need from us today in order to keep this process moving forward? I think the first bullet on that last slide that Sherry shared talked about developing a cross-sector team, or I can't remember the adjective, but a team to, work on this in between council meetings, since we only meet quarterly. So do you want a couple of council members to sit on that team with you to, move this forward, help answering questions and bouncing ideas off of? Do you need us today to say, of those 6 counties that you identified, from what we know about those counties, we'd say, maybe picking up on Harriet's idea, let's start with an urban and a rural one. Other criteria that we want you to use, like the OPIP information. What else do you want from us, Carrie and Sherry?
I mean, I think a couple of people from the council to help figure out the actual process and procedure would be a good thing. I mean, certainly Carrie could work with Alyssa around it. I think you challenge us on the data. I want to go put the OPIP in and see what that does. And then maybe by email, if you can do that communication without breaking the rules, send you out the data with that on it to see if it changes it. And I think you all should decide, you want one rural, one urban, one east, one west, one north. I mean, that's how Texas did it. It's so big that they had to think about geography as well as the type of community. If you look at your population and there's Black, there's Native American, there's Latinx, you can say, I want one of those. So the most important thing is to start, but I think a couple of us getting together could hash out some details and get it back out to folks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I'll certainly be involved in that. Are there any other council members, 1 or 2, who have time? And I don't think it'll take a lot of time, but who would be willing to be in sort of a think tank group as we try to put this together? Peter, thank you very much. Okay. Peter and I will start, and then if there's anyone else who wants to join us in working with Carrie and Sherry on this, and Alyssa obviously will be included, that would be great. And, Peter mentioned one specific example in Southern Oregon, and I don't know, are there any other sort of, not hot spots, but places, things happening around the state that you're aware of that would say, look at this carefully?
There's a nonprofit organization in Ontario called Uvalcre that has just prioritized childcare as its #1 issue, and they have, I think, 5,000 or 7,000 Latino members in all of Eastern Oregon, and I would say that would be a really good place to connect with.
Awesome. Thank you, Anne. Great information. Other suggestions and ideas like that? Okay, if you hear of any, think of any, George, with you sitting over in northeastern Oregon, and Angie, if there's anything in the tribes that kind of pops into mind around the state that we might be aware of, want to be aware of, that would be great. So next steps for us then, we'll try to narrow down, and with the 2 of you, Sherry and Carrie, helping us figure out what counties do we want to select, maybe using Harriet's suggestion of starting small and then seeing what we learn from that. And then within those counties, and we'll probably do that by email, council, and then within those counties, selecting a community. And part of that, I'm sure, is based on who are the local partners or the local contacts.
I think so, but my advice to you, I mean, if there's a place where you don't know the local partner, that just means it'll take us longer to do it. I think if you want to do tribal lands, it's going to take you longer to do it. So put it on the list and let's work it out. But not having a local partner is exactly why we should be there. And so we have to get on the train and take our time getting there. And that's true with tribal communities anywhere I work. It just takes longer because of the trust relationship that needs to be built and the clarity about the benefit to them.
Okay, good point.
All right.
Great point. Okay.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Sherry, very much. We appreciate you a lot.
Thank you.
Look forward to working with you.
Yes, absolutely.
So Carrie, anything else you want from us right now before we take a quick break?
No, I think I'm good, and I can work with Remy and you on the follow-up steps so we can quickly add the data piece and get that back out to people while we set up times to meet. So I think we got some great next steps.
Okay, and I guess OPIP does the child abuse rates and foster care. But Kali mentioned those two, and I just think those are two others we want to make sure we factor in.
Okay, great.
Okay. All right, we are going to take how about an 8-minute break? How about if we start again at 2:40? Sound okay? And then we'll dive into the CCDF. Okay, thanks everyone. See you in 8 minutes. All right, here we go. It is such a beautiful day in Portland. Is it beautiful everywhere? Yeah, yeah. How's Philadelphia, Harriet? Is it beautiful?
It is actually beautiful today.
Yeah, this is, okay, we all should be like Kali sitting outside. Let's see, grabbing my agenda. So that was a great discussion. I'm very excited about these listening sessions. I think we're all, I know I'm going to learn a lot, but I'm looking forward to them. We are ready to talk about this famous draft CCDF plan that David's been working on for a decade or so. So he's excited to have this on the agenda. And I think we all know, one thing I've learned from looking at section 1 and just glancing at the other sections is that I learned a lot by reading the plan. And I thought I knew quite a bit about child care and what we're doing in Oregon, but I knew less than I thought. So I think the plan is a great outline of obviously what's going on in child care. And we'll see how this works. I appreciate each of you being able and willing to take a section of this. And since I've got section 1, I'm starting, and I think however you've decided to talk about the section is fine. We're hoping each of us will take up to 10 minutes and just make some opening comments, focusing on the questions that were asked, and then leaving time for other council members to say, you know, here's another idea I have about leadership or decision authority or whatever, health and safety, whatever our sections are. So we'll see how this goes with a 217-page document. Nothing like an audacious beginning. So I have section 1, which, as you know, is leadership and coordination. And just getting the 30 pages down into a couple of comments and minutes. One of the things that's really clear from reading this section, obviously it's, you know, how does the leadership and administration of the program work? And the lead agency, which obviously is the Early Learning Division, has the authority to administer and operate the program through public and private agencies that they have agreements with. But the lead agency always is retaining the responsibility for the program. So even though we have lots of partners in this realm, the buck stops with the Early Learning Division and the Early Learning Council, which for me is one of the driving forces of saying that the top priority for the council needs to continue to be the establishment of a new standalone, independent, totally responsible agency that actually can set the policies for childcare as we know it needs to be established. Right now, we share a lot of the roles with the Department of Human Services, as we know, because of the whole ERDC program. And it will be much more efficient for us, but I think also for families and for providers when this can be consolidated and much better coordinated. It's just a very complex system to navigate. And we know we will always be connected to ODHS, and this one eligibility system they're developing will be a huge benefit for families. So not questioning the future of that. Part of the section 1 is they want to know how we develop the CCDF plan, and there's a huge explanation of all of the input that's been received from the public, providers, families, stakeholders, partners, et cetera. So we have a very robust outreach and engagement plan. The partners that we connect with and coordinate with are listed in multiple different areas of the administration and decision-making section. As you know, there are countless partners. I think one of the salient examples of partnership is in putting together this mental health consultation model that is being done and is underway. And I was just listing the partners that are in the section 1, which is OHA, Children's Institute, Ford Family Foundation, Black Child Development, PDX, and the ELD, of course, has numerous staff. Our Tribal Affairs Manager, whom we met earlier today, the Equity Fund, Head Start, Licensing, Spark, EIECSE, PSU. So there are myriad partners in this work with us, and they're really well laid out in the document. As far as changes or additions to the draft plan, obviously the first one is on page 1, which is where we list the administrator of the agency, which is now Alyssa. So that will need to change. But one of the other areas where I think it would help to add content is around, it's in the provider groups. It's optional partners, but provider groups. I think we would do well to talk more than we do currently about how we work with the providers in childcare. There's just a very short paragraph right now, but we know that providers are a critical part of that. So that would be one thing I would suggest adding to the current plan. And whether we can, since we've been doling out millions and millions of dollars to providers to keep them, alive, I don't know if the plan can refer to that or not, but certainly it is a part of what CCDF looks like today and what that system looks like today. So it's just one area I would look at. And my final comment would be, I think as we look at other priorities that the council could add, well, first of all, I think we ought to keep all of the priorities. And, they're listed on the guide that Harriet and David put together. So I think all of those council priorities are still very germane. I would just add one around the providers, supporting providers, so that we both continue this to increase the supply and also the quality of childcare. And then my other suggestion is that we add a priority that says the ERDC needs to move over to the ELC and have that almost as an independent priority, since we're not sure what's going to happen as far as the establishment of a new agency goes. So those would be 2 suggestions I would have to add to our current priorities. So those are my comments. Staff fill in, council fill in. Or
I would just say, I think the partnership, when I was listening to, I don't know if that was a conclusive list. You said there were a lot of partners. I think the partnership piece matters a lot, and statewide representation, of course, and having multicultural partner representation across the state is very important. And so I didn't hear all that. I only read my section. So I don't know all that it entailed, but that's something that strikes me. I think when we were looking at Jackson County earlier, the diversity of Jackson County struck me. And I think we have a tendency to not assume that some of our areas, whether they be frontier or rural, have that cultural diversity. They do. And then so who are the people connected with that group, those diverse, populations within those areas. So I just think it's important to maybe expand beyond the usual suspects for partnerships.
Yeah, great point, Kali. And you're certainly right. I didn't give you an inclusive listing of the partners. I think it's 2 pages in the document. But that's a really good point about whether we've really connected, especially some of the multicultural groups across the state. And with our equity fund, there probably are a lot more that could be added this year. Yeah, good point. Other comments from council members or sports staff, for that matter, anybody?
Cully, one thing I was just thinking about, I went quickly, I have the plan open on my computer. So I went to look at this is one where they give you categories and you write down where your partnerships are. And there's one where the staff didn't, there's sort of a catch-all where they don't specify, but it might be a good idea to make the point that you just made, to devote that to the work that ELD has done around equity and multiculturalism, and because that could also be an encouragement to the people who prepare the template for the plan in Washington about how they might think about this going forward. So that's one way that we could help also to help them basically highlight this as an important set of partnerships and relationships.
That's I also it just occurred, I talked about culture. I think early intervention and social needs has to be prominent too. I think it's an underrepresented sort of conversation in early childhood, how to support children with special needs in an intentional way. So having groups that are connected with children in the category would be important as well.
Yeah, good point, Kelly.
So I think one of my roles is to help us keep going.
Oh, okay, Harriet, moving on. So my 10 minutes are up, ding, ding, ding.
Yes, your 10 minutes are up. So, but maybe before, just to make sure, because people added some additional ideas for improvement, just maybe one more call out if people had any additional ideas, basically for things to improve either the section, like what Cully did, fix the document, or also, as Sue talked about, like a future idea that you all hadn't articulated, that if something goes wrong with the creation of the new agency, that it would still be a priority for council to see that the plan, that we end up with a strategy to nonetheless have movement of ERDC into ELD for a more greater integration. So any others from people that anybody else wants to add? Okay, should we move to the next section?
Yes. Let's go to section 2. And Anne, I believe you're presenting. So yes, I'm responsible for section 2, and I want to start by saying I'm totally intimidated by this task because I read it, I tried to get enough out of it to share with you. I'm sitting in front of David Mandel, who knows this backwards and forwards and is the expert in it, and Sue just modeled behavior that I can't possibly replicate. So with all of those disclaimers, the section 2 is really about parents as childcare consumers, which just want to say that's an interesting comment that they're called consumers, and how do we feel about that language? But the idea is that we want to make sure that parents have all of the access and engagement that they need to be educated consumers, and to have access to information, both to make good decisions, but also if they have consumer complaints, what to do about it, and what more could be done with connecting with parents as consumers. The audience for this section is the parents, the child care providers, and the general public. But it's basically about assisting parents to get access to childcare information, as well as using that for information about other financial assistance. And then the other thing that's in this section that's interesting is also this emphasis on developmental screening, which we were talking about earlier, and making sure that we build into childcare this developmental screening, which I think we've talked about already, but it's really, the social emotional stuff that we talked about earlier and the CCO level metrics on social emotional learning. So that is what this section is about. And the focus is on kind of what are the
barriers, or how can you increase parent engagement in this whole process? And one of the things that's interesting is to think about whether family engagement is its own standalone thing, or whether we're so committed to this that it's integrated into everything. And this is a place where it's a standalone sort of priority, and that's good. But we also want to make sure that it's there everywhere, so that it's part of the culture of what we're talking about here. So that's one thing that I want to talk about. A second thing I want to talk about is sort of there's an emphasis on sort of making sure that it's in languages and it's culturally specific. And the thing is that we do, I mean, recently we've had really great connections with our culturally specific organizations. And so I think the question for us is how we make sure that our culturally specific organizations are ensuring that we're getting the family and parent engagement that we want to have. And then there's other things like making sure that we have parent-friendly language, which is actually, I didn't see that called out here, but parent-friendly language that's not bureaucracies, but making sure that parents can be there so that they can advocate for themselves. So a second part of this has to do with sort of the data system and the one eligibility in the data system for making it easy for parents to get involved. And I think a question that I have is, how much is this focused on parents being able to navigate for themselves and determine their own eligibility and carry that forward, as opposed to it being something that's held by the agencies. But no matter what, there's no doubt that our data system is antiquated and that it needs to be updated. And maybe this big infusion of one-time funds, I think I heard you, Alyssa, earlier saying, one of the things we're going to do with this big one-time infusion of funds is to really take advantage of it to think about our the data systems and so on, because that just seems so appealing to me, that you want to invest in improved technology when you have a one-time infusion of funds, rather than setting up something that is going to then require ongoing investments, which we may not have 2 years down the road. So let's be sure that we're taking advantage of that. A question that I had, really a general question that I had, is, because I'm so new at this, is what's not working in the data system? And I'm sure you all are just absolute experts in it. I'm not, but I'm sure that you're looking at what's not working and trying to make sure that you're accommodating that as you develop the new system. Questions that I have are, how is 211 used? And I think there's something that's sort of a consumer side and some that's a provider side. And if they're in two separate places, if most consumers go to 211, what does that mean? How do we make that link between providers and consumers? I just am curious about this, is how does one eligibility portal transfer to the ELD? Since it sits over in DHS, and I'm just kind of curious about that. So that's the extent of my comments. And David, I apologize if I butchered everything, and please correct me or share with the group what I've missed, big things that I probably missed in describing this section.
No, that was really lovely. And I have to say, I so appreciated the comment that you made on the framing of consumer education versus parent engagement, because it brought me back to, one of the things that we were sort of doing over the course of this year was the alignment between the state plan and Raise Up Oregon. And to be honest, to do that alignment, we had to do a lot of, if you squint, you could see it, because, and what I mean by that is, the language in Raise Up Oregon and the ELC priorities is so clear on that parent engagement is about empowering parents. So there just seemed to be such a gap, when we were doing that alignment between the really powerful language in Raise Up Oregon and the more limited language around consumer education and consumer choice in this section. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Maybe we could include in the plan comments, and I was struck by that too. It's a feature of the federal law but it's another thing that's a perspective taking to share also that feedback, that's not necessarily how like council or other stakeholders understand the situation. So I just wanted to confirm, I agreed with David. I think that was a really powerful observation of the way in which some of the centralized efforts to get the resources to the states maybe create some frames that aren't necessarily useful.
So I just had a comment after what Ann was saying about the data and using the one-time funds for data. I'd be interested to know too how we connect in. The CCOs have a mandate to develop, engage in community information exchanges.
Yeah.
So how does that fit in? It's been described here as 2-in-1 on steroids, and we launched it last month, and it's already has I guess about 26 partner organizations that are looking to expand. So how does early childhood play into those community information exchanges?
Thank you, Peter. That was actually in my notes to say, and I didn't say it. I'm so glad you said that, because that's, I mean, right now in Douglas County, we're getting our CIE getting up and running through the CCO. And so how do these link together? So I thank you for raising that. I think that's really important.
Yeah, that is really important. And I hope staff can come back to us, in a future meeting and kind of tell us how we can link into that. So if you just put that on kind of a REMI, maybe you can make a note of that for a future meeting. Thank you. Thank you.
Anyone else want to plunge in with any other ideas for improvements, either in the text or big ideas for the future, like Peter and Ann just put on the table about the relationship with the community information exchange?
Let me just say, and I didn't take time to read this section. So I chaired the task force 2 years ago that Jay and I were talking about earlier around this child care safety portal. And we had a long list, and parents were involved in that task force, and we had a long list of what needed to change on the division's portal so that it would actually be parent-friendly, user-friendly. And I'd just like to make sure that as much of that is incorporated in the CCDF as is reality, but also see if there are some things that we should still be advocating for that came out of the task force but haven't been implemented either because of COVID or funding. So I just love to make sure staff's using that as a reference document.
And this, thanks Sue for saying this, and this may be totally out of left field, but if we're building a platform with information, could there also be information about child development? Could it be also an educational platform around child development and child learning? Just a question, and it may be totally out of left field, but I thought I'd put it out.
It's a great question, Anne. Sure. That could be a bottom line for what we want to do with parent engagement.
Along those lines, there's a group in Coos and Curry counties that, you always hear the phrase, I just have this baby, but they don't come with an instruction manual. They're actually writing an instruction manual based on child development practices and trauma and resilience. So I'll be able to share that with this group at some point in the future.
Great. Remy, make a note of that so we get that from Peter. Thanks, Peter.
In addition to what Peter said about the CCOs, I just am curious throughout how CCOs are integrated into our strategy, because I do think there should be integration. They are doing so many different things that impact early childhood, and I still feel like the two sectors are pretty siloed. So just being thoughtful about that. Thank you for mentioning it, Peter and Anne.
Yeah, great point, Holly. And they have money, ongoing money. Okay, shall we move on to section 3? And thank you You did a great job, and you need to stop referring to yourself as a novice. You lost that title a long time ago, my friend.
Beginner's mind. She has beginner's mind.
Oh, I have good staff coaching is what it is.
Yeah, we all depend on that. All right, section 3 is being presented by Khalid.
I thought I'm section 4. Are you sure I'm section 3? Oh my gosh. This is like my worst nightmare.
Well, we will just shift you to section 4 and we'll let Harriet take section 3.
Oh no. Oh no.
Oh, who knows? It could have been my texting back and forth with you, Kali. So I may have to accept responsibility for that.
Kali, this is a very good thing because I was supposed to do 4 since Katie wasn't going to be here, but I didn't do 4. So you actually did the right thing.
Okay.
It always works out. We're all flexible, including Harriet and David. And Harriet, would you like us to move to 4 while you refresh 3?
Yes, then actually, and David may want to do it. I'll text David. I'll start sending you little notes in the chat while we work, except that in addition to Kali's comments on 4, David and I spent a whole hour with Katie on 4. And we have a whole thing, Kali, after you're done, that David can share about Katie's insights. It was a very good hour of everyone's time. So, but you should start. And then David, I think, will report out to share additionally, because we have a whole note that we worked on with Katie.
Okay.
And meanwhile, David and I will start chatting with each other about how we're going to address 3.
That'd be perfect. Thank you, Harriet and David.
Okay.
Well,
I'm really sorry. So 4 is about ensuring equal access to childcare for low-income children, and it's looking at the system overall and looking at how we maximize choice and supply, as well as assessing market rates and looking at payment rates and adequate payment rates, as well as the payment practices. In the beginning, I actually had a lot of questions about different pieces of it. There was information about how we identify how parents are informed about child care certificate. It allows the option to choose from a variety of categories, but categories don't include language. They don't include diversity as a standard, they talk. Yeah. So I think there are questions about how do we ensure that the categories are as inclusive as they can be when we think about, and we didn't check off all the ones that they listed on this section, but that we are as inclusive as possible when we have looking at how parents are able to choose. And I bring that up partially because families or parents as consumers are sometimes looking for things that don't fall into the usual buckets. So anyway, there was a lot of conversation on looking at the data systems, state data on the extent to which eligible childcare providers participate in the CCDF system. So when we look at the overall system, who are the providers that are participating? I thought we did pretty well in participation, with the exception of exempt center. And I actually wasn't sure how important it was to have the exempt providers participate. So that's just a question mark. But for the certified registered family license center, we, I would say 2/3 or more are participating, which felt like it was good to me. I don't know what David and others would say, but I thought, well, people know about this, and that's good. There were a lot of different things saying that the lead agencies have particular responsibilities for ensuring that families have what they need to make decisions. And I think it occurred to me that we just have to be very clear that particularly our CCNRs who play a big role in this have the capacity that they need to be able to provide families with what they need. So there's all these requirements, and I think think I've been around long enough that I know we've had a lot of conversations about CC&Rs and how they differ by region. And we need to make sure that and we've seen in certain regions they don't have what they need. And when I read this, I thought, wow, there's a lot that they have to do, and we need to do what we can do to make sure they're staffed up to fulfill what they're supposed to be fulfilling. Another thing that stood out to me, wait, hold on, look at my notes. This idea of consumer, it's very much sort of parent driven, parent choosing services. It occurred to me, are there ways to bring things to parents instead of parents going to things? So parents and families that have barriers, how are we how can services be brought to families? And particularly in the virtual space, are there ways that we're maybe not thinking of to be able to bring services, particularly on the grants and contracts, child care services available through grants and contracts? There are things provided in different ways to families. And I think that more partnerships with CBOs or requirements that CC&Rs maybe partner with CBOs, not just childcare providers, could be a way that you can get more families engaged with what the opportunities are. So again, something akin to what we were talking about earlier about that trusted source that can point the family to the CCR&R to then find what they need in childcare. So just making these extra linkages. I had a question about there was a question about will the lead agency use grants or contracts for direct childcare services to increase the supply or quantity of specific types of care. And it said, if yes, does lead agency use grants or contracts to increase the supply and or quality of childcare programs serving certain populations? And there's a list of all the populations. And the one population that wasn't checked that caught my eye were children with disabilities. And I don't know why. I don't know why we wouldn't be trying to ensure that we're placing children with disabilities. Maybe I'm reading it wrong, so I think I just want to know a little bit more about that, but it felt strange that that was not checked. I think we need to ensure that we're increasing the supply of and quality of childcare places that have proven experience in supporting children with disabilities. And so if that's not happening, I think it's something that needs to happen. I'm going to try to speed along. There are a lot of different categories that outline let's see what lead agencies are required to do, and serving children in underserved areas, infants and toddlers, and the things that we would provide, I think the agency will provide to support this whole system. And so we outlined a lot of different things, from family child care networks to technical assistance and support that we would be able to provide to support families who are looking for different things. And we did talk about having technical assistance to support children, families who have children with disabilities. So there are pieces that we're doing to support what families looking for. There was not, we did not call out the fact that children who receive care during non-traditional hours, which that we're providing info with that. That's another question mark for me. That's particularly when you look at low-income families, a lot of them are working graveyard shift. In the early years of our early learning network, this is something I heard a lot, that families had to leave kids home by themselves in the middle of the night because they had no place to put their children. And so we have not ever talked about this really as a council, but I think it's something that we need to be thinking about when we look at these multi-tiered systems for children. And then, as I said, it goes on to looking at market rates, assessing what market rates are, and then making sure that we're representing the market well and adequately and accurately.
And I would say the CCNRs, again, wind up being very important in this because they're the ones that are looking at, they have all the data. So the databases exist within the CCNRs. And so we would just have to be sure, again, that we're supporting them, because to look at what market rate is and what other people are doing, those are the source of all the information. I will say I was surprised knowing how all the conversations we've had in the past about CCRNRs and how to them and where they're lacking, the amount of dependence on them in this entire, at least this section, is pretty extensive. So, you know, I had questions of, is the data accurate? Are we ensuring that they have, you know, systems that are cleaning up data, tracking data, and making sure, you know, they're being on top of things? 2.1 was mentioned too, but I think this CCRNRs are a greater piece of this whole puzzle. And then when looking at the payment, I don't have a lot to say there. I think they want to make sure that they have different calculations, and they're making sure that people are being fair with how we are charging families, and that we're covering all services, that families aren't having to do anything ordinary if they're using, if a low-income family is using one of the providers within the network of the CCDF. And so I think we have a lot of, it seems like we have checks and balances to ensure that there's nothing. What I took away is, if I, as a low-income person, want to use a provider in CCDNF, will I in any way be shortchanged, or will my experience be any less than, or will it be a fair and equal experience and opportunity? And it seems as though we set up a system to be equal, but I don't. This is where I think David and Harriet would have more info, because I'm not in the details of it. So all I can see is what is laid out. You know, all the rates, I'm just trusting that it is what it's supposed to be. I don't have any bit of comparison. I had a lot of questions, like, you know, but I don't know enough to know. So I don't know. I can go longer, but that's the general.
Thank you, Kali. Let me ask David and Harriet to add anything from Katie's comments, to just add briefly to Kali's. And I think you've given us a great overview, Kali, and certainly some things for staff to dig into and follow up on. So what would Katie add to that?
Yeah, and I can just add a couple of highlights from some of Katie's comments. So as Kali was talking about, this section covers both how providers who are being paid through the subsidy, how those rates get set, but also questions about what the state is doing to monitor and ensure an adequate supply of childcare in the state. And I think a lot of Katie's questions both got to that intersection of funding and supply. I do want to start with a call out that Katie made. The section includes a new practice that ODHS is instituting now for all providers of paying in advance at the beginning of the months. And that's a really important step for helping providers have a little bit more financial stability. So Katie wanted to call out that change that ODHS made as a real positive step. A lot of Katie's comments, I think, went to the effect of the CCDF plan section sort of calls states to talk about certain levers that they have around rate setting and other financing, but are those really sufficient to get at the sort of fundamental question of financing and supply in the state? So I think she was sort of asking us to even go beyond what we're asked to look at within the CCDF plan, you know, especially what can we do around supply, of creating inventory and providing resources for startup. Noted that CCDF funds are not allowed to be used for facilities, and that's a really important gap in CCDF and a really strong need for the state. So that was an area that Katie called out that sort of goes beyond what's in the plan, but an area for that she called out for continued advocacy. And then I think just a general call out of, is this system too complicated and bureaucratic, and does it make it too hard for providers to navigate? And then just another comment that a place for advocacy, she noted, sort of goes beyond the plan, is that in addition to needing more resources to better serve low-income families, we know that even middle-class families are struggling to afford the cost of childcare. And is there a way to expand investments and supports to even broaden that net of families that are able to provide support? And Harriet, anything else you want to add from Katie's?
Yeah,
note?
I think that was a good summary. I think Katie was a little bit right, calling into question that probably there needs to be greater focus on the state's supply building strategy. And Sue kind of said the same thing in her comments on section 1. We need a more defined quality strategy for the providers. We need a more defined supply building strategy for the providers, not just inventory, but sustaining the supply. Those are their operating expenses. Basically, the other thing Katie noted was, Kali, I think you might have talked about this a little bit too, was she was concerned about actually the level of participation in the child care assistance or ERDC program, and that more work needed to be done to get more providers basically to be participating. And I know that's on Alyssa's list of things to accomplish. But she also had a different idea that I'll just add that people, I don't think was in the mix, which is she thought that in addition to like the peer-to-peer with the unions or other providers, that there should be consideration given to establishing almost a business navigator program to separately to have people who would assist providers into entering into participating in the state's subsidy resources. So I just wanted to mention that. But the last thing maybe is we talked about how there's some ways in which this gets really complicated. And Katie was saying it needs to be simplified. Was it complicated because the resources are scarce? And so barriers for both families and providers keep coming up because they're a way of managing, in a way, the pain. Okay. And so trying to get out from under that and to say, maybe there's still not enough resource. We still have to do better and make this simpler and easier, both for families entering and using services and for providers to be successful. So,
well, okay.
Should we move back to section 3 quickly?
Just a second. I think Anne has a comment or question. Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't read this section carefully, but you know our incredible focus on the differential and subsidy rates for rural and urban. Is that in here? Is that in this section? And are you addressing it?
So yes, well, so that would be a topic that's covered in this section. I'm not sure that what you would find in the section as it is, you would necessarily say it adequately addresses that. So that may be just a place that you want to call out for future work.
I would like to call that out for future work. Thank you, David. Thank you for that prompt. I appreciate it.
Okay, I think Remy's going to kill us if we don't keep moving.
Okay, just to be clear, that's future work in the current draft.
I just call out one other thing on the supply side that I had underlined, but I didn't, and starred and realized that I didn't say, and that is every county had a childcare desert. So from a supply side, like the really powerful data point to me that it's a huge issue everywhere in Oregon. So that's all.
Good point, Kali. So thank you, Kali, and thank you, Katie, via David and Harriet. Okay. You know what? Instead of going back to section 3, because I don't think these are sequential, how about if we just keep moving through with council members and then we'll jump back to you guys. So let's go to section 5. And
I had section 5. This is Peg.
All right, Peg.
And that was health and safety. And we can probably make up a little time here because it's pretty concrete. And it was good that I was given this to look at. And Angie, I don't know if you looked at part of this too, but basically it's talking about licensing requirements, kind of detailing the categories of different childcare opportunities for families, and defining the ages and ratios and of the various categories. Talks a lot about teacher qualifications. The thing that I was probably most interested in from a medical perspective was the health and safety issues with regard to first aid, CPR training, standards regarding food care and handling, whether or not people were trained, providers were trained to recognize child abuse and neglect, and if they knew how to report that. I think that it overlaps nicely with one of our priorities, and that's the safe sleep issues that we know is a huge deal. I think I've said before, I sit on the Child Fatality Review Board, and that's a huge thing, at least in our county. Talked a little bit about emergency preparedness, and I think that really hit home, particularly with the fires and, you know, what happens if there's a natural disaster or a local disaster, and we're trying to reunite families. And again, addressed the child development issues, and I suspect either ACEs screening or providers knowing about normal development so they can recognize what falls outside the bounds. Talked a little bit about ongoing training, and again, the equity piece with having all of this information available to providers in multiple languages. And I don't know that it specifically addressed the technical support of that, but I think that's important. Talking about ongoing inspections and monitoring to be sure that we have ongoing quality, that it's not just that they passed it once, but it's ongoing. And then the importance of background checks, and I think adding in the recommendation that we approved today, and that's of the adult abuse, screening for adult abuse as well. The only thing I didn't see, and David or Harriet, maybe you know more about this, was if there was any drug testing for providers or their employees. I think that's an issue in many of our communities, and we want to be sure that that we're having safe providers for our kids. So I don't know. Again, Angie, I don't know if you looked at this one too, but that was kind of my take on this. Pretty concrete and straightforward.
I actually, Sue had reassigned me to a different one, but I do have some comments on this one as a provider. So, and I had actually made some notes on this from our last meeting. Two things. I'll start with background checks since Peg just brought that up. I think it's really important that we have some system or a goal of improving the time that it takes to have background checks completed, especially in the fall. If you hire somebody in August, you may not have them on the floor working for quite a while, especially if they come from out of state. And that's, I know, out of our control because we're at the mercy of other states to respond to our requests for information. But that is very challenging. If I hire somebody this time of year, pretty good. I can get them working in a couple of weeks. But if I hire somebody in August or September, maybe even October, it's a long time before I can put them on the floor, which means I have either no classroom or I hire subs. So that's one thing I wanted to talk about. The other thing is specifically about the change in recent years of having complaints about child care providers being investigated by both, they call them tandem investigations with the ELD and ODHS, OTIS. I don't know what OTIS stands for, OTIS. But this one is a concern to me as a provider. So parent complaints about our provider or our facility may not have anything to do with child abuse. DHS investigators that come into my facility to investigate something are looking through that lens of child abuse, and it's a very different animal. So that concerns me. I don't know what was the driving force behind moving in that direction, but it's created some pretty big challenges for other providers that I know. In one way, for instance, teachers in other Head Start programs that were basically threatened, we're just going to take your background, we're going to remove you from the criminal background registry. So now this provider has no livelihood. She's a teacher in a Head Start facility. So it's something that's really concerning to me. And I just wanted to put that on everybody's radar. Thank you.
Okay.
And we can follow up with more information at a meeting on that work and where it stands.
Great. Thank you, Angie.
I just do want to, related to this section, I do want to flag something that's on the agenda for later on this meeting. So if you look at the grade 1 of the recommendations from the Child Care Task Force, is to conduct a thorough review of childcare rules and licensing standards to identify where there's an opportunity to provide clearer language, reduce duplication, and elevate the standards that are most important for supporting children's health. And we'll have a presentation from Tammy later in this meeting on exactly work that's underway around that. So I just wanted to call out that one.
And I don't know if there's any quick response to Peg's question about drug testing for providers.
I believe I'm correct in saying this. That's not a CCDF requirement, so it's not something that we do.
Okay. So Peg, I may be putting words in your mouth, but I would be guessing that you would wonder if that's something that should be considered.
Yeah, I would really support that. Again, I think we have to, and I'm sensitive to Angie's comments about DHS or Otis coming in and investigating. I think we want to do this in a non-punitive, non-kind of blaming way, but just saying, it's like anything else. We're looking at safety and how can we improve the situation. And if someone has an employee that works in their center that has a substance abuse problem, but maybe is not interfering with their work, how can we help that employee, but also keep kids safe by not having them exposed to that?
I did want to, sorry, go ahead.
I just want to add, there's a lot of bias in these investigations, and I've heard from providers talk about, this is a little of what Angie was saying, but I've heard providers talk about not only do they have a certain lens when they're looking for things, but there's assumptions made about certain people that lead. I think it's the dangerous, especially with drugs and alcohol. Like, I understand the public health safety risk, and we have not eliminated bias in the system of investigators. And I don't know if we even understand the full picture of what that looks like. I've heard a lot of anecdotal stories over the years of experiences that were troubling, in my opinion, and I don't think that there has fully shown them. So I think we have to keep that in mind as we think through these pieces.
Okay, thank you. And Peg, thank you very much. Appreciate you providing the background and the overview and good questions. Let's move on then to section 6. And George, I think this is yours.
Okay, I'll sign in 1 second. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Sorry. So I'll do a kind of what I think is a good overview, and I might get a little wordy, so I apologize. And just in case, I am kind of a systems guy, so a lot of this was kind of right up my alley in learning and reading. So this section was about recruiting and retaining qualified and effective childcare workforces. So think of it this way, for me at least, it was like, how do we recruit and retain a qualified, effective childcare workforce, or what do we do to recruit and retain a qualified and effective childcare workforce. So for me, it was about what we do and how we support and improve the quality care services as the focus for this topic. So it's all about the system and explaining the system and the professional development that is done to improve the knowledge and skills for staff that are working with students. And there's a lot of equity in mind in what I got out of reading this. So one of the earlier sections just gets into the professional standards and the competencies that are used. There's 10 core knowledge categories, and I'll just say that to me it was important to hear these categories. One is diversity, another is families and community systems, health, safety and nutrition, human growth and development, learning environments and curriculum, observation and assessment, personal professional leadership, program management, special needs, and understanding and guiding behavior. So that was, for me, it's great to know that our system has these core knowledge categories that they develop for our teachers to make sure we have an effective childcare workforce. It went into career pathways. And so for me, there was 3 main categories for career pathways for people to get into this field: is the degree, credential certificate. Another way is through college course credit. And a third way was community-based trainings. And again, this is how we support. I could go into deep detail, but there's of course articulation agreements that happen at different universities, and it explains that. It explains our role, or early care and education committee, and the early learning council as the advisory structure for what takes place for recruitment and retaining qualified and effective childcare workforce. It talked about the workforce information, how we track and use multiple data points for early learning to see who's getting their credentialing and who's taking courses and where they're at. And then it talked about financing and how we go about financing credits and ensuring the ability for people to take courses, and that we use the quality rating and improvement system as another way of tracking and then potentially giving out scholarships for people that complete required trainings. And then it talked about like optional elements, and it talked about that continuing education training, unit trainings and credit bearing professional development to the extent practical is something that is done, as well as engagement in training and professional development providers, including higher education. So getting credits through working with accredited programs for credit and/or degrees. And I put in here as a thought, potential expansion in this area is kind of grow your own type programs with funding, where you have class assistants who potentially can use some of that experience and also get maybe scholarships to be able to wrap up any credential that they need to be a teacher. And then the other one would just be if we had more teacher pathway type programs in schools, where we had maybe an early learning teacher pathway, where you could have college credit or high school credit in high school classes, and again, develop more of a pathway workforce as another potential expanded element for this. Then it goes into the professional development framework, and it just goes into quality, and what it gets into for quality is diversity, stability, retention, and what is done in that framework. And I'll move a little bit faster. I would just say one of the big things on retention has been my focus. So I'll hit on retention quite a bit, because when I think of retaining, I think of a lot of things besides just professional development to retain a staff or to retain your workforce. And it goes into what the lead agency does, or what early learning does. And it hits on early training and professional development, health and safety standards that are done, early learning and developmental guidelines, being able to do training and professional development online and in person, doing things in Spanish and in English, or creating opportunities for access and opportunity in both language. You hit on health and safety standards, required trainings that we have to do to become licensed or stay licensed, I was really pleased to see that there was social, emotional, mental health training and professional development requirements that the state does. Then there's consultative support for social, emotional, mental health as well to reduce child behavior concerns. Getting towards the end, describe how state training professional development is accessible. Another thing that happens is we use outreach folks. So CCR and R, this is for Indian tribes and tribal organizations. We use outreach with providers. We use CCR and R, child care resource and referral, and a variety of process and systems to make early learning opportunities accessible. We also use translation services, whether in written or whether verbal, to give more access and opportunity for staff to be able to meet credentials. We're very inclusive. What I got out of it is we have a lot of inclusive approaches for staff to be able to do the work and people to access services. We've got forms, we've got materials, we've got resources in multi-languages. We've got culturally responsive practices listed and ways to meet the needs of those that are disabled as well. So I got, again, a sense of like, okay, we're doing a lot to support staff and also meet the needs of families. And I'll just kind of get to, then the last part was just the lead agency providing more technical assistance as necessary, and then hitting on the business practices that you would have to have if you're a childcare provider. And again, the idea of support in differentiated ways was important for me to read that. We were doing that. And, you know, with agencies and in the business and the business practices, what I got out of it is there's support for budgets and projections and planning. There's supports for creating financial reports and having internal controls and marketing, as well as staff recruitment. So there's a lot of good business practice that was explained that is done to support childcare programs and childcare providers. So that was basically the gist of it. Now here's some stuff that I thought about. It's kind of hit a little bit of what Callie shared with kind of regional hubs or CCOs. And back to the concept of retention. I think there's a lot of things that were just said that were good PD things. I didn't get a lot of like, this is good retention. And when I think of retention, I think of, you know, a lot of services and supports in place so that people can still keep their job and be happy to keep their job. And one of those is like food systems. You know, there could be food support systems or health systems that help people to get food, buy food, make food, create food, do things with food that makes a less burden to them. There's a little bit of mention of food support, but not very much. I'll just say that. And if you just created more systems around that, or we created more systems around that, it would probably be easier for childcare providers to be okay with a lot of things that they're doing, and they would have a system of support for food. Another one was back to like we're going to be in kind of mental health counseling, social emotional trauma for quite some time. And back to the regional hubs versus CCOs, if they were giving folks regionally to help out with on-the-spot support for mental health or behavioral or social emotional things that they can go back and forth with a childcare provider, they would probably feel that they were being listened or understood or supported somehow to be able to do more with the families or do more with the children. And that's not in here. That's not in here for me in a way that's like, this is really good for retention. For me, they're going to get burnt out pretty fast if they have to do all these things. And these are the things that I would say schools have in general. And that's where I'm just saying that the car that you have is kind of a bare bones car. And I kind of want to see a car that has more bells and whistles, if you can get more bells and whistles for the car. And then the other thing was like supports with pension or an individual annuity plan, or talking about those kinds of things, because again, people will stay longer and do the work better if they know that they can give their lives, their lives to this career, and then in the end they can hopefully have some level of retirement that's better than just, I'll just say, than not much. So this to me is more of a public service job, and we should start doing things that make it more like a public service job. So if there is money that gets set aside for annuities, or money that gets set aside for 401ks or pension plans, that would be another way to increase retention. And then if there was parent involvement specialists, and those were the folks from the CCOs or the hubs that were really helping out with all these kinds of professional development things for parents, or behavioral, social, emotional, mental health things, just system navigator type folks that just did a lot, that would be something that would just make it easier for folks in childcare to want to stay in there. So those were more retention ideas, but I'll stop.
George, I have to say, those are really important points that you make about retention, and I'm so glad that you highlighted that. I can say from a provider perspective, those things do make a difference. I have a program that has a lot of longevity. My employees stay, they come here and they stay, but that's mostly because the tribe subsidizes my program, my budget, and we have excellent benefits for our employees that include retirement and great vacation pay and a lot of other things. And we are servicing, staff mental health needs. So those things are extremely important. And I almost feel sometimes a little wee bit guilty that other programs don't have all the support that I have, because the retention of my staff is directly what leads to the high quality services I provide children and families. And we have a wonderful track record here with our last 2 consecutive reviews from the Office of Head Start have been perfect reviews with 0 findings, and it's because my staff stays. Shifting gears though, I want to say something about just what the workforce looks like right now. I've been trying to hire teachers for a year, and I'm not fully staffed. And I know K-12 is going through this as well, but because of our recent expansion in the state, which is really awesome, there's been a lot of new slots in the state, and hopefully more expansion to come. Just hiring and finding people to fill the lead teacher positions is really hard right now, really, really hard. And I have these openings because of expansion, not because I'm losing staff, but because of expansion. It is really important to identify alternative pathways and to, hopefully get support from universities and colleges to help those people that are currently in the workforce, help them gain the credentials that they need while they're working. So, I have a lot of people here that started out as parents in my program that became substitutes, became aides, became assistants, and are really close to becoming teachers. And so I know it can be done, but we are kind of at a crisis level right now for having the workforce available. Thank you.
Yeah, Kali.
That makes me think we should look at, I know Ronnie Herndon's program has they're training families, parents to be teachers. That I think it's an in-house program. I haven't studied it. He's talked to me about it, but those alternative pathways, and it's taking people, to Andy's point, from the community, knows the community, loves the children, and giving them the skills to teach. And if I could channel Ronnie, he would say he believes teaching is a craft, and that you experience and having opportunity to be with children in the classroom, you build your craft over time. It's not just instruction. And the more you sort of make it too theoretical, you actually don't necessarily become a better educator. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity there that we need to be thinking about and supporting, homegrown type of programs. And what's nice about Head Start is they have a framework and they kind of know what to do. It's probably harder to do that outside of a Head Start maybe, but I think it's worth looking at. So I didn't realize the shortages were quite so bad, Angie, so thanks. But that to me raises the need for some of these other approaches.
Thanks, Coley, for adding that, because Ronnie does have a program for apprenticeship training, and I think it makes a huge difference. Like I said, a bunch of my staff here had children in this program. They're here because they really want to be here, and we help develop them into teachers, and they are a part of the community. So I think it is definitely a model worth exploring further and supporting.
Wow, great input. Great comments. Anything else? Workforce, we know you can't run an early childhood program without it. So it's urgent. Okay, thank you very much, George. You know, every time you and I talk, George, we get down to workforce. So I appreciate your focus on that. And obviously you understand it really well because it's where you spend your days and probably your nights too. So thank you, George. Great job. Peter, how about talking with us about quality?
Sure. It's a pretty straightforward section. First, I just wanted to acknowledge David and Harriet. This is an incredible amount of work and incredibly well done and incredibly well formatted for us to be able to go through. So I just appreciate that. In this section, it really focuses on continuous improvement, and the major kind of requirement is that each year of the plan period, states and territories will submit a quality progress report, the ACF 218, that will include a description of activities funded by quality expenditures and the measures used by the state/territory to evaluate its progress improving the quality of childcare programs and services within the state/territory. So basically saying, you know, what is your quality improvement plan, your continuous improvement plan? States and territories must fund efforts in at least one of the following 10 activities. Supporting the training and professional development of childcare workforce. Oregon does that. Improving the development or implementation of early learning and developmental guidelines. We do that. Developing, implementing, or enhancing a tiered quality rating and improvement system or other systems of quality improvement for childcare providers and services. We do that as well. My dog's helping out here. Improving the supply and quality of childcare programs and services for infant and toddlers. We do that. Establishing or expanding the statewide system of childcare resource and referral services. We do that as well. Supporting compliance with state/territory requirements for licensing, inspection, monitoring, training, and health and safety. We do that. Evaluating the quality of childcare programs in the state/territory, including evaluating how programs positively impact children. That's done in Oregon as well. Supporting providers in the voluntary pursuit of accreditation. That's done here. Supporting the development or adoption of high quality program standards related to health, mental health, nutrition, physical activity, and physical development. Also done in Oregon. Performing other activities to improve the quality of childcare services as long as outcome measures relating to improved provider preparedness, child safety, child well-being, or kindergarten entry are possible. So this section talks about how we address this through Raise Up Oregon. It talks about our SPARK rating system, our quality rating and improvement system, QRIS. It talks about what the CRR activities are, CCRR activities are, and the specific tools that we use for quality improvement, and the measurable indicators for progress with the specific tools and programs. So I think we have a really solid report to give in terms of continuous improvement. One thing to note, and this was mentioned all the way back when Sue started, the development of the statewide early childhood mental health consortium is discussed in this section as well. And my concern with that, before I get the other recommendations, is how will that be implemented? And again, we go back to workforce in that area too. Some of the things that George was talking about make absolute sense. If we had more behavioral health workers that could be in the community, at school-based health centers, in places that have access to providers of preschool or childcare, we could actually make tremendous progress, but it's a huge workforce issue on that side as well. Recommendations include increase in subsidies for SPARK rated programs, for programs that reach those SPARK standards, and increasing Baby Promise. Both of those are solid recommendations. But I did find a typo, I have to say, on page 196. It's written STARK instead of SPARK about 1/3 way down the page. So that is just something to know.
Okay, so Peter, it sounds as if your assessment is that from a quality improvement standpoint, we're in pretty good shape right now.
It does seem that way. Absolutely. And we can't, there's always things we can do more of, you know, in encouraging the Spark related programs, increasing the number of programs, increasing the subsidies to those programs to as an incentive for folks to be in that system is definitely a place we could go. And again, the idea of having a comprehensive mental health, behavior health model for early childhood is outstanding. It's just that workforce issue that's going to have to be overcome.
Right. Peter, I just wanted to comment that one of the things you raised that I think we talked about during the time we said, what is the plan? It's implementation. It's not required to address scaling. And just listening as I'm thinking about many of the observations people have had, some things are like more to change, and then some things are like more to scale. So both things are present. Scaling is really an issue. But there are also gaps. So just to clarify, basically, you know, that the weakness perceived from people looking at all these plans is it's full of what you're going to do, but there's never any statement about how many people you're really doing it for.
Right.
Yeah, excellent point. Yeah, Khalid.
So one thing about the Spark, Spark doesn't have enough relevance for the consumer. Like not enough families are looking to see what the Spark rating is. And so if we want Spark, and I say that because you mentioned incentivizing people to be part of Spark. I think until the consumers see there's a value, you know, that they're looking for Spark rated programs, it's hard to build that incentive for the provider. I remember talking to a couple providers that it just felt like more work for them. They were a high quality Reggio program, as a woman of color owned program, and she was just like, why would I do that? Because I have people, and it occurred to me then, but just when you said it, Peter, I was like, this was a couple of years ago when we were working on Spark and trying to, but I think we got to loop that back around and articulate, and maybe it's part of the supply management and what CCNRs are saying. I don't know, but like somehow that has to have relevance for people so that they are incentivized to be part.
Well, maybe financial incentives are the way to go. If you know, make it worthwhile to go through that process, and then advertise it as a standard.
Yeah, I have a feeling, Alyssa, there will be a lot to do with Spark in the coming year. Yes, we haven't talked about it much as a council to date, but I can see that it's coming. All right, any other comments about quality improvement and what's working and what's needed? Okay, thank you. So we're going to jump back now to section 3 and see what the Harriet and David show has put together in the last half hour. Thank you guys for being so spontaneous and flexible.
So I'll kick this off. So last council meeting, we mentioned that 70% of the CCDF funds need to go to direct childcare assistance. And really, for the most part, that's employment-related daycare. And so this section of the plan really asks in great detail, what's your state policies for your childcare assistance program for low-income families? So that includes information about who's actually eligible for the program. You know, in Oregon, that's entrance eligibility starts at 185% of FPL. We did extend that to 250% of the federal poverty line during COVID. It also asks extensive questions around the family contribution. So, you know, what we commonly refer to as the copays. How are those structured? For whom are those copays waived? And again, the federal rules require some cost sharing for families, but give families give states a lot of flexibilities in what that cost sharing looks like. I think a priority for advocates, for families, for providers, you know, and I would also say the state partners for a long time has been lowering those copays. We were able to institute zero copays during during COVID with a federal waiver. And, I think the conversation right now with the legislature is, are we able to leverage some of the federal funds to implement a new restructured copay that's a lot more family friendly. The section also looks at what are your rules, how are you really making sure that there's access to childcare assistance for families that have a child with special needs, for families that are experiencing homelessness, and also for families who are either on TANF or transferring out of TANF. And then finally, there's also a number of questions around, so a section also includes how a state defines work eligibility. So this also impacts are students eligible? So that's a place where there's a lot of state flexibility in, determining what counts as work or what are the work requirements. And then finally, there's a lot of information around continuity for families. How are states implementing the 12-month eligibility? The federal rules did give some flexibility to include a 3-month job search period so that a family would lose the eligibility if they don't find a job at the end of the 3 months, but that is a state choice and a choice that Oregon has made. Harry, do you want to add anything on this section?
No, I thought that was great.
So
David mentioned this. I mean, a lot of the advocacy community is really interested in these because this is the interface with which families get in and are the terms and conditions in which they are getting supported by the state equitable and fair. Those are the basic things that are, it's sort of what's the vision for who is served, basically.
And I should have mentioned also that HB 3073, in addition to creating a standalone early learning agency and moving employment-related daycare into the agency, also does have some specific policy reforms associated with the section, including capping copays at no more than 7%, of a stronger definition of 12-month continuity of eligibility. And Alyssa, you've been living in HB 3073, so I don't know if there's anything you would also want to add in relationship to that bill and this section or the copay discussion.
No, I think what we've tried to build into the bill is an allowability for the availability of funds. So recognizing that we're kind of putting some of these aspirational things like 7% copay cap in the bill, but also kind of giving us a little bit of that release valve in the future, kind of based on revenue forecasts and sort of future budgeting. There's an ability to make adjustments so that we're not continuing to come back to the legislature for program changes, but also being very intentional about what we would like to ideally see out of the program if funds are able to sustain that. And copays is a big part of that, as well as the 12-month eligibility.
Got it. Kali.
So, I mean, two things strike me that are not checked when it comes to engagement and outreach of families with limited English proficiency and with persons with disabilities. Again, the fact that lead agency doesn't accept applications at local CBOs, this goes back to what we were saying before. I'm not quite sure why, but that's an issue. And then that we're not using caseworkers with specified training. And Alyssa knows we've been fighting on the SB 36 as well as the House bill that was similar around banning suspensions and expulsions. But this access to people who are specialized, they all go hand in hand. A lot of times children that are having issues have learning disabilities or learning challenges. And so really wondering, how are we ensuring that we're supporting our children who have special needs, or learning disabilities, or behavior, how are we building infrastructure? We have an opportunity. We've put all these or we're pushing this legislation that is saying, hey, like, you can't get kids out. And one thing coming on the K-12 side is, like, when K-12 did that, they did the supports in place. And this is why ASME was against the bill. But I think it's necessary because it criminalizes children, and we do have to put these infrastructures in place. We need to prioritize people with these specialties. And so I just want to lift that up as something that a need for improvement as we think about inclusion. That's a huge thing. So.
Yeah, excellent point. Thanks, Kelly. Anne, did you have a comment?
Yes, I'm sorry to do this again, but it seems like this might be the better place for me to talk about the differential copays between rural and urban. And I wanted to make sure that I raised it in the right place, and maybe I raised it in the wrong place. And so I just want to do it right now. So I know you know what I'm talking about, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Anne. We appreciate you keeping it wherever it belongs. Probably can go in several sections, actually. Any other comments or questions from council members? Yeah, so the plan goes in July 1, is that right?
So yeah, I can talk a little bit about next steps. So, the plan is in part our compliance document, right? So we do have, we will get a first read from the Federal Office of Child Care next week telling us where they think the plan, potentially falls short of their requirements. So we will also then be working on, that as part of the editing process. As I think I mentioned last meeting, what we're also planning on doing is taking all of the feedback from today, but also all of the feedback from other engagement sessions, and in some sense building out the document so that we really have a forward-looking document that includes all of the feedback and identified areas for future work. So, I think there'll be some opportunities to revise what we submit on July 1st, but we're also bound by whatever's in the plan actually has to be happening and in place, more or less on October 1st. So I think we also want to make sure we capture this, that we post that document alongside our plan so that, this is not a federal requirement, but I think this is something that we want to do so that we're using this as really the companion to the plan that really identifies the work that we need to do and not just how we're meeting the obligations of the federal plan.
Right, right. So David, one of my questions is, because we know we have a lot of emergency measures in place because of COVID. So is that what you put into this plan that gets submitted? Because that is what it is in July of 2021.
I think, to be honest, I think this goes into effect October 1st. I think we're going to find out a little bit more how, if and how they want the federal resources called out in the plan. So I think I just need more guidance, from Federal Office of Child Care, if they're looking for that to be included, and if so, how. But this is really, how we will be in compliance, what we will be doing effective October 1st. And again, it's, there's very little in this that's about the actual use of the CCDF budget. So we will also have additional documents, though, I think that we'll be able to take back to you, as we work with the legislature and other partners to get a little bit more specificity on how the federal resources are being used, the one-time federal resources are being used.
David, I just wanted to add, when yesterday or the day before, the feds did release the guidance for stabilization. And I think that they said, I think I have a document that says the little tiny part of the plan that they want to have included in the July submission with the thinking just about stabilization. But the rest of all the pieces eventually, they haven't said yet, but I think the thinking is eventually the plan would have to be amended for any new additional uses that are decided upon with the other 2 rounds of federal relief. But they do seem to be thinking that states will have something to say about the quote unquote stabilization share in the plans that go in July. Obviously, that is not addressed in this document. And they just literally released their guidance yesterday. And by the way, it's 26 pages long, just to give everybody a feel.
But I have to say, one of the most readable federal documents I've read in a long time.
Right.
And it's less than the 270-page plan that we have drafted. So must be that paper reduction plan that they passed some time ago.
Sue, I just wanted to appreciate Harriet and David for creating this and putting this together, and just appreciate the council as well. I think, you know, we've had to put in CCDF state plans for years, but I think this is the most engagement I've seen. And that's in part because of the work Harriet and David have put in, but just want to appreciate you all for taking the time to read such a complex document and come back with your reflections, because it's just so valuable to this work, and just wanted to appreciate you all for taking the time to do that.
Oh, thank you, Alyssa. Yeah, I'm very impressed with what the council has done with this document. You guys are awesome. Watch out. We'll probably get a similar assignment in the future. That's
When
what
next time
happens.
everybody can draft the plan. People were so into their sections.
And signing up for that, I can tell. Oh, geez. Oh, wow. Well, I want to add my thanks to David and Harriet. The guide that you put together obviously really facilitated this discussion. So thank you for investing the time in that.
And I also just want to say this, really appreciated, I know this has already been said, but just the richness of the conversation and how much work each of you put into making this actually such a robust engagement today. So really appreciative.
Yeah, I have to weigh in because I loved listening to this, and actually, like, the ideas for improvement are really great, and the different ways people thought about it. It was really awesome. So it was great for me to be able to listen in and sort of hear, because there's a lot of new ideas that came out, like different ideas because of the different perspectives people have, that I think will hopefully help guide some new directions for the state work.
Yay. Well, we will see it again, and it'll be fun to see the final draft and this other document saying where do we want to go. Council, we are done with CCDF for today. We have, as you know from the agenda, we have 3 rules issues. 2 of them take action, and 1 of them is information setting us up for our summer meeting. My question, Council, is do you want to take a 5-minute stretch break now and then do the rules, or do you want to power through the rules without a break?
Okay, powering through.
Let's just power through.
Power through. Okay, we are going to power through. And I guess we're starting with Gwen and Sarah, neither of whom I see on the call yet. No. We're going to start with Tammy. No, Remy, what are you saying? Oh,
I was about to see if Gwen and Sarah were about to log on, but I see that we have Gwen here, so we can get started on either set of rules, whichever one you want to start with, Sue.
Okay, well, why don't we, hi Gwen, thanks for being with us. Council, let's go ahead and start in the order they are in our agenda. So this is the language for appeals to decisions that we made on the equity fund. You may remember we had this conversation in August. Yeah, that was a long time ago. Anyway, we had this conversation in August saying we need to change the language so we're really clear about how do people appeal decisions that we made with the equity fund. And so this is something that we've heard about before, but not in a long time. So Gwen, if you'll do a quick update for us, and obviously we also have this information in our packet, and the goal of this council will be me looking for one of you to make the motion that is on page 31 of the packet. Just a heads up. So Gwen, welcome. Appreciate you being with us.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair Miller and council members. It's nice to see almost all of you, but most of you, it looks like, from who's here today. So thanks for having me. And As Sue pointed out, I'm requesting that the council take action by approving the proposed revision to the rules. And this is for the Early Childhood Equity Fund, Oregon Prenatal to Kindergarten, and also Preschool Promise Program. It was all three rule sets that needed to have a revision made to them. And in summary, the proposed revisions require the ELD to do three things. One is to clarify in the request for application what can be appealed and the process by which an applicant can make an appeal. The second requirement is that of the ELD is to inform all applicants of their right to appeal in the language that they prefer or identify in their application. And then the third requirement is that the ELD will provide information on how to access assistance to complete and submit an appeal. So there were like three key points there that I think that's kind of how I would summarize it. And we did have a rules advisory committee. And I think, just to highlight some of the takeaways from that group, it was a very diverse geographically and racially diverse group and mix of providers and other early learning partners. But really the overall theme was the ELD needs to improve our transparency around the process and communication throughout the whole process, like from start, like the whole RFA process, like from announcing that there'll be an RFA to the whole solicitation, the review process, the awarding and the appeal process. We also asked the Rules Advisory Committee, what does transparency look like? And some of the information that, or some suggestions that they get back to us was that we need to be upfront in describing like the target allocations and distribution plans, both geographically and across the different provider types in our mixed delivery system. We need more details on the scoring and review processes. That we need to be more available and accessible throughout the whole process to provide technical assistance. And also, although we did our review process in a public forum, it was like a Zoom meeting, and there was a suggestion to do live streaming, similar to, I think, how the council meetings are held. There were some access issues for some individuals who wanted to be a part or at least watching the review process. And that we have a more robust and sort of a system of providing feedback to applicants who were awarded and also for those who were not awarded, so that we have that in our plan of communication right from the start of how applicants will get feedback after they've been scored and awarded. So, and then we had in the, I don't want to take too much time, so that's there was also in the hearing, we only had one individual join us on the hearing, and there was actually, the comment was not in regard to the appeals process, but in an inconsistency in our rules across the three programs. So there's also included in this council action request, kind of an alignment of the rule language across programs regarding what to do if there are funds available for reallocation.
Okay, and that's all that crossed out and highlighted piece, I'll bet, right, on 32 and 33. Thank you, Gwen. Are there questions of Gwen about these changes in this language change?
Just want to say how much we appreciate transparency.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Always room for improvement.
I'm curious what prompted that. What prompted the changes?
Yeah, Clea, that's a great question. If I think probably some of the council members remember when we got to all the way through awarding last year with the programs identified, it was a little bit unclear on what applicants could actually appeal and if they were, and what the role of the council was in approving of those appeals. So there was some, the council felt, I think, that there needed to be clarification because the appeals that were coming in, some of them were in a sense asking the council to overturn like a funding decision. And actually in our rules, that funding decision and like final award decision, it was actually assigned to our early learning systems director. So it was really a clarification around like what's the role of the council and where do we need to put language about what can be appealed and how it can be appealed. Does that?
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions from council members? If not, I would entertain the motion on page 31.
This is Angie. I am so sorry I had to step away for a single second. And then as soon as I did, two of my employees said, wait, just 1 second, if you have a second. And I didn't have a second. And so I missed Kali's question, and I think it might be similar to mine. Sorry, Gwen, I caught the tail end of your response, but just what this, because the new rule doesn't really say, what role does the council play in appeals in the future, if any?
Yeah, I have to agree with you there on that, Angie. I think that the sort of the recommendation here before you for the rule change is that the role of the council will be determined sort of in that, like in each RFA in the solicitation, so that it's not sort of a predetermined that, and it'll focus more so that that would be like the RFA would outline the role, and that would be the division's responsibility to like make that clear, and that everyone is aware of like what can be appealed and how and when. So I don't know if that's.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, what we were trying to do is not have sort of this like where the council could in a sense overturn that, like a funding decision that was made by the early learning system director, and also that and some of the appeals were because of funding. You can see some of the language around availability of funding. Some of the appeals that came through last time, we just did not have the funds available. So it was really sort of making it really clear, like we're not necessarily able to offer more awards or move award, like in a funds around, because in a sense, if someone's appealing more funds, then it has to come from somewhere. So it was like, we're taking it from someone else. So in a sense, then the council was in this position of like reducing somebody's award to fulfill another appeal. So that was, I think, the space that we were in and trying to correct.
Thank you, that makes sense.
Any other questions? If not, how about a motion?
Sue, I move to adopt the proposed language dated May 12, 2021 that updates Oregon Administrative Rules 414, 460, 0015, 414, 470, 0042, 414, 575, 0025.
Is there a second for that? Second. Thank you, Anne. Any further discussion? If not, those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
I'm guessing those are ayes, yes, not opposing. All right, that passes unanimously. Let's go on then to our next rule change that needs action. And this is with Tammy Scott, who's been on the line for a while. Hi, Tammy, thank you for being with us again. And this one, I think we heard about in February. So here we are, ready to take action 3 months later.
Yeah, so in February, I presented really technically 3 different rule definition changes. One was for regulated subsidy, that was to align our childcare child definition with Oregon Department of Human Services payment policies. The other one was for certified family and certified center to align the infant definition with what registered family says, which basically puts the definition of an infant up to 12 months rather than dependent on their ability to walk. So I'm bringing that back to you today to get a vote on that and hopefully get approval for that.
All right. Thank you, Tammy. Questions of Tammy? If there are none, I would entertain a motion to approve the language on page 35. So moved. Thank you, Anne. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Peter. Any discussion? Hearing none, those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand. Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, Tammy.
Aye.
And last but not least, by any means, we'll have Tammy continue and talk about, I love this agenda language, childcare rules superset update.
I think that's to imply that this is the entire world of child care rules. So council members, I think we put on our seatbelts and get ready for an amazing ride that we have ahead of us in the next 12 months.
And I think Remy was part of the superset naming. It came to me and I'm like, sure, sounds good to me. So today we're going to start our journey that is going to last probably about 1.5 years, where you're going to really get to know me well as we talk about our childcare licensing rules, the process that we've been going through for the past couple of years. Sorry, people are coming home in my house. The dangers of working from home. You actually should have seen me while Gwen was talking. I had puppies and dogs wrestling all over that I was chewing outside while my camera was off. Anyway, so I'm going to just kind of start today with giving an overview of what we've done and where we're at to get you up to speed. And then I think I'm going to be a regular attender to kind of give updates along the way. So if it's okay, Sue, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Yes, that will be great. Thanks, Tammy.
Okay. So we are gonna, like I said, talk about childcare licensing and all the rules that are related to that. Oregon currently has 4 rule sets. We have certified family, certified center, registered family, and regulated subsidy. And just as a reminder, regulated subsidy providers are those providers that are not required to be licensed, but they are listed with Oregon Department of Human Services, so they're caring for children that are on ERDC. They're typically not required to be licensed because they're caring for 3 or fewer children. We're also working on adding a 5th set of the rules that would be a school age only rule book that would really focus on the specialized needs that school age children have. The childcare licensing rules are really the foundation of health and safety standards in Oregon for children that are receiving care outside of their home. They haven't had a full revision for many, many years. I mean, I can't even, when we were talking about certified center and certified family, I've been here 21 years, and I think the last full revision on those 2 sets was like the early 2000s. Registered family was done around 2014. So this is a very long overdue project. They have been updated along the way, you know, piecemeal here and there in response to changes to the Child Care Development Fund, safe sleep needs, lead testing, etc. But a full revision is very long overdue. Okay, so we have some guiding principles of what of our work and some goals as we're doing the work. The first thing we want is a rule alignment across the set of rules. So back in 2017 and 18, when we really started this big project, it was the first time that we ever placed the rules side by side to compare the languages and align the language in all the sets of rules whenever possible. We realized that family child care is very different than center child care, so sometimes that alignment didn't happen. But with the core health and safety standards, or when you're thinking about like a discipline guidance and discipline section in the rules, all the language should match up regardless of the type of rules that you're in. So that was really a very big project and a very needed thing to have them all side by side. We're working on having plain language and simplifying the message for clarity, reorganizing it so that it has a better flow and makes it easier for childcare providers to find all the things that apply to a certain section. And then, like I mentioned, we're working on developing the school age only rule set, and that's going to support the successful operations of those school age only programs, because we know that for school agers, they have very different needs. They're in school all day long, so they're not going to childcare to really meet their educational needs. They're really there, you know, to burn off steam at the end of the day, have a couple of recreational hours before they go home with their parents. So the needs are very different than those for infants and toddlers. And so as we're doing this entire rule review process, we have the equity lens infused into all the different pieces. We have on our review team that's working through more, and I'll talk more about that review team. We're, infusing an equity lens as we go. We have a special internal equity advisory committee that's doing a review on that, on the entire rule set. And then when we get to our engagement process, that also is going to have equity infused along the way by doing engagement with a lot of diverse communities. And I'm even going to talk about the engagement that we've already done in the diversity and equity that's been involved in that. Okay, so this isn't something that we're just picking up now. We've actually been working on it since about 2017. So like I mentioned, in 2017, we did a side-by-side rule alignment across the facility types. We conducted a crosswalk and took consideration of best practices as outlined in Caring for Our Children. And if Caring for Our Children is a new thing for you, it is a collection of national standards that represent the best practices based on evidence, expertise, and experience for quality health and safety policies and practices for early childhood care and education settings. So it goes through every aspect of early childhood programs and provides input on what the best practice should be. We consulted with American Academy of Pediatrics when appropriate for things such as safe sleep and a lot of infant issues, Consumer Product Safety Commission on particular topics such as playground safety and infant equipment. We did significant amounts of stakeholder engagement. And again, this is back in 2017 and 2018. And I wanted to kind of review some of the engagement that we did do during that time. During that time, we did engagement with all types of childcare facilities, from center-based to family childcare. Additionally, in 2019, we conducted 26 additional engagement sessions, and those were held throughout the entire state with more than 400 participants. And in the 2019 engagement sessions were offered in English, Spanish, Russian, and Somali. Back in 2017 and 2018, the Early Learning Council had a subcommittee called the Child Care and Education Committee, and we met with that team monthly, and they provided input on proposed revisions, and then the rule committee made edits based on their input. The committee included parents, providers, Early Learning Council members, and community stakeholders. So draft rules, this is again, still back in 2017 and 18, draft rules were posted to our website, and that allowed input from anybody who wanted to go onto the website and actually provide input rule by rule to submit that feedback. We worked with and provided opportunities for the local environmental health specialist and Oregon Health Authority to provide input. We conducted topic-specific surveys on revisions that we knew would have a greater financial impact. An example with that would be we surveyed childcare centers about staff qualifications and what would be the implication if we changed the staff qualifications. I remember we did a survey on ratios implications. If we changed the staff to child ratios, what would be the implication for that? So we really went about engagement in a multifaceted manner. We also surveyed more than 600 parents to find out what factors were most important to them regarding staff training and experience, and to help guide us in our practice. As a result of all these engagement sessions that we did in 2017, 18, and 19, we made edits to the rules, which also included some concessions that may have had a larger financial impact. We also got support and buy-in from the critical health and safety rules, such as safe sleep, that we really didn't feel like could be postponed on implementing. The Child Care Education Committee was instrumental in creating the direction for topics such as staff qualifications, ongoing training requirements, safe sleep rules, and increasing standards for registered family childcare. As monthly, we took topics to what we call the CCEC, and they provided their input. The rules that we sought engagement on previously, they are all included in the current rule set that we're working on now. So 2017, 2018, we put a pause after that. They didn't get implemented. And now we're taking that same rule set and picking up on that work. So now what we're doing, we have the versions that we made in 2018, and we provided those rule sets to a federal technical assistance team of licensing experts, and they have taken that draft and all that work and all that engagement. Basically, they've reorganized it. They've assisted us with some plain language, and they've also even beefed up the rules even more, adding suggestions for best practice based on caring for our children and what other states are doing. So we have an internal rule team that has been going through, so the federal technical assistance people have made a certified center rule draft. So our internal rule team has been going through their proposal and fine tuning and inserting their suggestions for best practice. We have been elevating anything that they put as a suggestion that seemed to have be potentially problematic or maybe had some equity concerns. We've elevated those issues to the Early Learning Division executive team, and also teams such as Gwen's team that we thought would have an effect, and received input from them. So an example of something that we elevated is the federal technical assistance team suggested a rule that indicated that everybody who works in a child care center has to provide their social security number. And we couldn't, from a rules team, quite connect how that was a health and safety issue that needed to be in the rules. And we really thought that there could be some equity concerns with that, with not everybody wanting or having a social security number to provide. So that's an example of where it just didn't gut check with us. So we raised it to the ELD executive team. So the rules team is finalizing their draft. As I mentioned earlier, the ELD has an internal equity review team that's going through all the rules to make sure that we're not establishing standards that would unfairly affect underserved communities. And once we provide that center rule set back to the federal technical assistance people, they're going to start drafting the center rules, certified family rules, and registered family rules, where we will then wash, rinse, and repeat and do the whole process all over again. An exciting opportunity that we're pursuing is with Child Care Aware of America, and they basically do a benchmarking project. The benchmarking project is going to take our current rule set and benchmark it and grade it, and also benchmark and grade our revised rule set. And what I'm expecting is that it's going to show that that we started out pretty weak, and that with these additions and these changes that we've significantly strengthened childcare licensing in Oregon. And the idea is then when we go out for engagement, we will have those two scores so that we can kind of help tell the story with the individuals that we'll be doing engagement with again about where our licensing rules are now, why it was important to strengthen them, and what the result is of that strengthening. So we're hoping that it'll really be very clear, the strengthening that has occurred. We are working on contracting out our stakeholder engagement because, as you heard me describe before, the engagement process is very, very intense. And in order to do it right, we really just decided that contracting out would be the best option for the ELD. So we are working on getting a request for proposal and RFP put out so that we can get some bids and get some support on that process. Okay, let's see here. Let's talk timelines. So this is the timeline, and I don't know if you guys got this in your materials, but I actually already made a slight adjustment today. So if you do, it looks very slightly different. So February through November is us going through all of our rules. So February through May, we've gone through the center rules. And then once we get back registered family, certified family, and school age rules from the federal TA experts, we'll do our review, our process, and finalization. And we figure that's going to take us at least till the end of November. In April and May, which is right now, we have our internal equity advisory review group reviewing center rules. This is the change that I made this morning. The benchmarking project, we don't have a control over that timeline. We're dependent on Child Care Aware, and so far they have not started the benchmarking. So what this said in your materials is May through July, but because they haven't started their process yet, And they basically have indicated that they're not able to start the process till they have other states to do it all at the same time with. So we're a little bit at their mercy. So I updated the date on that to say June through August. And hopefully it's still only mid-May, so we still might get it started this month. And then engagement, we're really figuring that engagement is a full 6 months process when you figure that we have 4 to 5 sets of rules that we need to do the engagement on, and each set of rules has a different audience. So we're hoping to have the contractor in place by September, and then that engagement will take a good solid 6 months. Then we'll have our rule advisory committees happening April, May 2022. I'm sorry. Nope, that's our recruitment. April and May, we're going to have 2 months where we're going to have applications and review the rule advisory committee. And then those committees will meet next summer, figuring that that's going to take about three to 4 months with 5 sets of rules that need to be gone through. And then if everything goes perfect and according to the timeline, we'll be here for you October 2022 for final adoption. Now, the other part that is something else that we don't have a ton of control over is getting the contractor in place and the request for proposal. It's a pretty big contract that we're looking to get. And I don't have a lot of control over procurement processes, but I know that we're pulling out all the stops to get it put in place by September. So hopefully that will happen in line with what we're hoping. Okay, and then let's just one more thing before I go on to the next slide. When we look at adopting the rules in October 2022, that doesn't mean that we're going to be ready to have them all put in place. We need to have systems in place to train 4,000 childcare providers on entirely brand new sets of rules, and train all of our staff so that everybody feels supported and successful and ready to move forward. So adoption could happen in October, but then we're going to have many, many months of the implementation process. Okay, questions for me today?
Wow, great overview, Tammy. And one thing that you and I have talked about, but I think the council will want to hear, is that we're going to not be surprised by what we see a year and a half from now, right?
Yep, like I said, I expect that I'm going to be a frequent flyer to the point that you're going to be like, oh, Tammy's back. That we're going to update you all along with the process and how it's going, what we're hearing from the engagement and the feedback. That's the plan.
Great. So by October of 2022, we'll say, yeah, we'll have it memorized. So we'll just say all in favor.
Hopefully that's the plan for sure.
Okay, I like that plan. Council members, questions of Tammy about this superset update or whatever. Anne?
Well, first of all, Tammy, I cannot tell you what a comfort it is to know that you are here and that you are doing this work. And this gives, at least me as a council member, a sense of confidence that there's somebody who really understands this and is engaged with it and is overseeing it. So thank you very much for that. That was really great. And I want to say that I really appreciate your point about, okay, you can set the rules, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be implemented if you don't attend to the training and infrastructure and capacity building that goes along with it. And I think that's very important for us as a council to put that, to sort of make sure that we keep reminding ourselves and our state colleagues of that's going to take investment. And it's going to be really important. So I want to say that. And then the third thing, which is going to drive my council members crazy because I do it all the time. I love the equity lens, and I want to ensure that the equity lens has also brought a rural equity perspective to the issues. And I wasn't going to raise it, but since I know you're dealing with it right now and I see on your calendar it's coming up right now, I do want to raise it and ask you how that is being addressed.
Yeah, in the engagement sessions that we have done previously, we are no strangers to travel. Part of when I talked about the 26 sessions that happened in 2019, that was statewide. Absolutely. We traveled the entire state. Now, with COVID, we've gotten so good at Zoom too. That just opens up all sorts of opportunities. There really are no limits to who and where and how we can do that engagement. And that's going to be part of the work of the contractor. We're putting in that it needs to be statewide, languages, urban, rural, different socioeconomic, different racial profiles, the whole gamut.
Thank you for saying that, because just the issues around the regulations around center versus and all of the rules around that and the center-based issues for in rural areas are just different. And I'm glad to know that there's somebody who's going to really look at it through that lens, because the longer I'm here in rural areas, the more I see how different it is. And so I'm very grateful to you for paying attention to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Anne. And I don't know how rules build in that potentially flexibility for those differences that Anne's talking about.
Just the requirements about what's a director over what, and size and so on. Just all of those kinds of things. And I appreciate your attention to it, Tammy.
Yeah. Other questions or comments, suggestions, input for Tammy? This is one of her outreach engagement sessions. So
number one.
We're kicking it off before the contract is even signed. So, okay. Well, we know this is important work. Tammy, I've been on the council, I think 5 years now, and I think I heard about it when I came on. So it may be done before I go off. We'll see.
You know what? My goal is 100% done before I retire in 2027. Like, this will be my crown thing.
Well, I'll share that goal with you, Tammy.
Thank you.
All right, Tammy, thank you very, very much for being with us today, and also for all of your leadership in this.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, you too. Well, Council, that ends our official capacity as rule makers, or rule soon-to-be makers. Any other comments from council members, reflections, suggestions? We may not see each other officially until July 28th, or maybe something like that.
I have one thing
yes.
I would say.
Kali.
I think we're in a really pivotal place in our state for early childhood, and having been one of the, I guess, longer serving council members, to see how we've evolved over the last 5 years and beyond. I served on a committee even before joining the council. And so I would say the last 8 years, there has just been this tremendous transformation. And we're sort of now at the peak of being able to implement things that were only talked about, a few years ago. And it's very exciting. And I think that this council is leading us as a state into this really place that foundation for what early childhood will be in Oregon into the future. So I just a lot of the conversations today, for whatever reason, reminded me of conversations years ago. And we just come so much further, and I'm excited by the opportunity that lies ahead, and just grateful to have been able to be a part of it.
Yeah, great comments, Kali, and I certainly second them. This is, and I think Peter said this at our last meeting, this is an unbelievable opportunity that we're going to seize the moment, I guess, because it is before us. So great time to be a part of it. Any other closing comments? Angie?
Did I miss the adoption of the rule revision for the definition of infant? You guys?
No, you voted yes on it.
No, I voted yes on the. I remember we did we do both of them at the same time?
No, No, I did them, we did them separately.
That might be when I stepped away then for a second. I totally remember doing the rule revision on the appeals, but not the language for the infant. But I didn't have any comments. I just wanted to make sure that it got approved.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that we approved it. We had quorum, we got everything done. So no worries on it, Angie. I'm glad you have no dissent though.
I don't.
Okay. Good question, Angie. Sometimes I miss the vote, forget the motion and forget the action. Anything else, council or staff? Any other comments?
I would just like to, I would like to appreciate the staff. Unbelievable staff work. Really, really appreciate it so much. And I know Alyssa isn't here, but what a pleasure to welcome her into a space that with big shoes to fill, but is what a great person to have. And I let the record show that I look forward to, I would like to speak on my behalf, that working with Alyssa is going to be great.
Yep. Well said.
You're here.
Yeah, here is right. We're so lucky she stepped in. Oh my goodness. Okay, well, Peter and I will be in touch with you as we move forward with the listening session development and organizing. And I hope you all have a great evening and a great, I guess, end of spring and beginning of summer. Thank you again. You all have done fabulous work today.
Thank you, Chair Miller.